80 Years in America. Frank Noel. Life in Virginia. My father, Henry R. Noel, was a doctor and died when I was 5 years old, so I do not remember him. My mother, Clara Hambleton Noel, raised the 5 boys on the Painfield plantation of 800 acres until I was 17 years old. When her health failed, we moved to Baltimore, Maryland. This is 1954, and in going back to my childhood beginning in 1873, we move back into another way of life, almost another civilization, and into another part of the country where customs are different from the free and easy Western ways. Mount Landing, Essex County, Virginia, was our post office, miles from the Noel plantation built from the ground up by Edmund Favor Noel, who bought the land and built the home about 1821. He named the plantation Painfield and died there about 1871. It took time those days to establish a home. The year 1821 were the days of slaves, and all property owners used them, so a big plantation was built up as the years came and went, not in any given time. All these old homes had slave quarters consisting of houses and gardens that each family used as its own. And the plantations were run as a business, and only by keeping slaves happy and healthy could the plantation succeed. In 1878, when my memory began, the law had changed, and several of the Negro families that worked on the Painfield plantation had been given a house and 10 acres. They owned their homes and worked on the place. My memory starts with a big place divided into a number of fields by worm fences made of rails cut and split on the place. I remember cattle and milk cows, sheep, hogs, horses, mules, chickens, turkeys, ducks, and geese, and 20 or more buildings. The 6-room home was of frame construction with a large basement and 2 brick chimneys, one on each end outside. So the 4 big rooms had fireplaces. The fuel was wood for heating of rooms, cooking, etc. A large kitchen, 50 feet away, had a cook stove. In the basement was a big root cellar used in the wintertime. There was also a corn house, carriage house, storeroom, smokehouse for meat, cattle shed, dairy shed, chicken house, turkey, and duck houses, and a number of the cabins that had been Negro quarters and were used to store crops. Our overseer, William Marshall, a white man, lived in a home 300 yards away. Jim Bundy, a colored man, was assistant overseer and coachman. The land was big, flat fields, and quite a lot of rolling timberland with hollows running through it. These hollows had springs and some running streams of water in them, so the numerous pastures had water in them. Fruit trees, nut trees, berry patches, and during the growing season, March to October, sweet potatoes and almost every vegetable known to this country was grown. Solomon Bogues, a colored man, the gardener, took care of the meat. This was tidewater country. The Rappahannock River ran south half the time at low tide, and ran north half the time at flood tide. There were no automobiles and no picture shows. The nearest neighbor was 1½ miles away. The nearest school 6 miles. The nearest church 6 miles. And the post office 1½ miles. There was no phone. If you needed the doctor suddenly, you sent a man for him. The doctor used a horse to make his rounds, which he did about every week. I was raised in a home that was as near self-sufficient as possible. Painfield in my father's time in 1838 raised cotton, spun yarn, and made clothes that were tough and long-lasting. There was a shoe shop, and the leather was produced there from cattle hides raised on the place. Henry Fells, a colored Nan, was an expert cobbler and harness maker. They had corn and wheat bins full the year round. Cornmeal, grits, and flour were fresh, for in the summer the weather was hot, and worms and weevils were pests. So regular trips were made to the old mill with its pond of water that turned the overshot wheel, and the millstones ground the grain. In my day, we would take the grain to the Rexburg Mill, 3½ miles sway. The miller would dip in his measure, so much for each bushel, and he would grind all the balance and give it to us. We did the sifting when it was cooked. Not any little red packages with pictures on them, but the old sacks had what we needed to live on. Pork was cured in brine and later hung up and smoked. Some beef was pickled and corned in the fall and would last a long time in the hot weather. Chickens, eggs, and fish brought by peddlers were plentiful in the spring. They made lye and soap, raised cane, and had molasses. Turnips, cabbage, potatoes, and apples were on hand all winter. Those were the days when people helped themselves, ate the wheat, and had plenty of butter and milk with creamy, and all they asked of the government was to stay on the other side of the fence. My early recollections as a small boy seem to be with 2 older brothers and 2 younger brothers, of a Negro nurse we called Aunt Patience, and/or being allowed to play and exercise all I wanted, and a habit of going to bed early. I have a very dim recollection of my little sister, Bessie. She was with us such a short time. About this time, my father's health was bad. Pa was slowly dying of consumption, and in those days, lung trouble was considered to be inherited and contagious, so we boys were not allowed in my father's bedroom and did not eat with him. I remember staying at my aunt's home, Mrs. Lewis, and it must have been at the last illness of my father. He had contracted consumption years before, and it slowly caused his death. After all the trouble was over, and after my sister's death, say from my 6th birthday on up to about 17 years old, my early life at Painfield is not very clear. I remember we were washed and set up to supper in the nursery by our Negro nurse. Then my mother would come in and visit with us and tell us stores, and finally have us say our prayers and go to bed. Those were sad days for my mother, as my father's funeral and my sister's were not far apart. After all the trouble was over, we all met with Mother after supper and read in the Bible. Each boy had his week to read a chapter and then prayers and to bed. This was continued until we were some years older and had a teacher at Painfield. Perhaps my first taste in helping with the work was bringing in chips and wood for the fires. The wood was out and stacked 4 feet high, 4 feet wide, and 8 feet long. This wood was hauled to the house after drying and cut into stove and fireplace size. The colored people cut and ricked the wood as a mass job. Did you ever start on a white oak log with an axe? If you have, you knew that you were ready for dinner when the bell sounded. At that time, there were in our house 5 boys, my mother, the lady teacher, 1 cook, 1 housewoman, and 1 woman to take care of the meals and dining room. These were all colored people, and the cook had a full-time job. As always, there were colored men working on the place. As we got older, we went to the public school at Tappahannock, 6 miles away, and also went there to Sunday school and church every Sunday. We would get home to dinner about 2 o'clock. School at Tappahannock meant quite a day. We took turns a week at a time in going to the barn, getting the horse and buggy, and bringing them to the house. Then we had breakfast, got into the buggy, and drove 6 miles to school. We took our lunch with us and got back about 4 o'clock or 5 o'clock, and the horse and buggy had to be taken care of. Try that some winter day. 12 miles with a horse and buggy, 5 hours of school, and wood and chips to bring into the house at night. If this schedule were followed in the big cities, there would be no juvenile delinquents, and boys would come out of the public schools with an independence and self-reliance that is not gained by being petted and coddled. In those days, we fought life's demands, and help from the government was unheard of. The iron courage to fight life's battles is what made this America of ours, and what made Washington and his army heroes. They did not know the word defeat. Those were glorious years to me, say when I was 8 to 16 years old. There was plenty of work, plenty of food to eat, and plenty of time. Hurry is not such a big word. We had time to drop everything and go fishing and hunting on our plantation 1 mile wide and 1½ miles long. We had our own horses, guns, dogs, and our own fields and woods to hunt in. As we got older, we quit the public school at Tappahannock, and I was finally graduated from Aberdeen Academy in King and Queen County, Virginia. Henry went to the Virginia Military Academy, and Edmund and Wright graduated from the same school I did. Painfield Plantation was a little kingdom of our own, a splendid way of life, almost a different civilization. In those years, 1880 to 1887, the Painfield Plantation was a busy place, and that little kingdom was ruled over by one mind and will, my mother. She guided our lives. She was our only comfort. She smoothed all our fears and sorrows, and all we know of right or wrong was taught us by her. Each boy had his duties to perform each day, and was punished or rewarded as he deserved. One of the reasons for her wonderful control over all of us was she treated us with love and justice. Each of us had to do his share. We hoed the garden, cut wood, milked the cows, fed the stock, and, as we got bigger, worked. I remember the old lye hopper and the big black kettles for making soap, and many a day the orders, "Frank, make a smoke in the smokehouse, and use more oak chips, and not so much corn cobs and plenty of red peppers." There were 2 boys older than I and 2 younger, so as a natural consequence, I was right for more jobs such as taking up the ashes in the fireplaces, bringing in the wood, keeping the weeds down in the yard, and whitewashing. My older brother Edmund was delicate and suffered from nosebleed, so some of his work fell to me, and some of my worst fights at school were on his account. He was quick-tempered and never seemed to care how big any boy was, so I finished some of his fights for him when we went to school at Tappahannock. You can figure 3 country boys going to a town school, and our code of conduct was not to hit the first blow, but always to be quick to hit the second. We were too young to know enough to turn the other cheek. The town boys were a little more practiced with their fists, but we had the muscle, and both sides knew they had been into trouble as a rule. Those were happy days, and we had many fine friends made in our school days. We recited classes before the teacher by marching up and taking our seats on a long bench before his desk. A whole group would go up at one time, and the teacher would have anyone answer questions, and sometimes send a kid up to the blackboard to write or do some mathematical example. One day, an older set of boys were on the bench, and one, Alec Mallory, was sent to the blackboard. For some reason, I put a tack in his vacant seat with the sharp point up. Well, you can imagine what happened when Alec came back to his seat. The upshot was that the teacher had me stand up before him and hold out my hand. He had a ruler about 2 feet long, and he seemed to lean over backwards to get in a good lick. The class laughed. After school, the boy that told on me got over laughing in a hurry, and in that little fracas, there was no quarter asked or given. We went to school in a buggy and drove a horse named Prince 6 miles down in the morning and 6 miles back 4 o'clock in the afternoon. Prince was a big, fine horse and a trotter. You can imagine, when he started home, he did his best. In the winter-time, we tied up the lines and let him go. Many a time he would turn out around some slower vehicle, pass it up, and come back into the road. We had many fine friends in Tappahannock, and my mother visited there. She organized the Ladies' Aid Society in St. John's Church. Her friends sometimes came out to Painfield and visited for a day or so. We had friends from all over the country that did the same, and most visitors stayed one night, perhaps more. What a fine thing to have friends come to see Mother and bring a boy or two with them. And the next morning, the big hunt was on with the old shotguns. And how we would all eat when we came home from the hunt. There were hot biscuits, Sally Lund, sweet potatoes, fried chicken, butter, and huckleberry pie, hot cornbread, batter bread, and in the morning, grits and hot crackling bread. There was no running to the store. The store was, and 1/2 miles, and we had more to eat than they had. All summer we put up food for the winter, and winters were not so long there, December to March, as here in the mountains. Painfield Plantation was almost self-sufficient as to food, heat, and transportation. We used coal oil lamps and tallow candles, and slept at night time, and worked in the day, and life was good to us. 2 or 3 years after my father and sister Bessie had passed, and I had reached about 8 years old, my mother took me to Baltimore to visit her mother. We went by steamboat, took the boat at Tappahannock, 6 miles from Painfield. We went down the Rappahannock River to Chesapeake Bay, and up the bay to Baltimore and Maryland. We stayed perhaps 10 days, and made the same trip back. At that time, the steamboat was the old-fashioned side-wheeler, much like the paddle-wheeler used on the Mississippi. It was winter time, and ice was on the bay. The noise was terrible all night, and we were glad to get off the boat. Soon after, the side-wheelers were discarded in favor of the turbine drive. This was my first big trip away from home, and, of course, I was interested in everything I saw. Every few miles, the steamer would pull into a wharf at some town and discharge and load all kinds of cargo. In those days, freight on all the rivers was a tremendous business. There were no automobiles, no big trucks, very few hard-surface roads. The nearest railroad to Painfield was over 40 miles away, and water transportation had always been cheaper than railroad or truck line. Mother made trips to Baltimore, say, every year or so. Sometimes one boy, sometimes another would go with her. My mother's brothers would sometimes come to Painfield from Baltimore and stay for several days. On one of these visits, T. Edward Hambleton, my mother's brother, happened to see the renter's dog come into the chicken yard and eat up a nest full of eggs. He called for the shotgun and killed the dog. The renter, who had a part of the place rented that year, came over to the yard and told Uncle Ed what he thought of him, and they passed opinions to each other, but neither one crossed the fence. Uncle Ed said to Mother, "I will send you a dog that will keep other dogs away." Soon there came to us on a steamboat, as far as Tappahannock, a full-blooded Newfoundland. He was black with a white star on his chest, and he weighed over 120 pounds. He was a splendid animal, and was to prove blessing to us in many ways. We named the dog Leo, and he was always kind and gentle to us. We had a pond on the place that we called the Ice Pond, and in summer many trips were made to the ice pond by some of the boys and the dog. He was powerful and liked to swim. I learned to swim by hanging on to him up and down the pond. The dog was gentle, but capable of wonderful efforts. When roused, he could hold any dog by the ear, no matter how vicious or big he was, and no common dog had any chance with him. He was a great comfort to my mother, and she could control him with just a word. She felt safe walking around with him always by her. We boys loved that big dog. He was not just a dog. He was our friend. The swimming pond was a popular place in hot weather, and we boys went there to bath and fish. We had a little platform one side to walk out on and fish, but more time was spent with the big dog in the water than fishing. It was a kind of picnic. We were allowed to take Leo with us and go to the ice pond, where we cut ice and filled our ice house in the winter. The dog knew when we called him and started for the pond. You should have seen him play around, and he always got to the pond first. When we came in sight of the pond, he was sure to be in it swimming around, while the dogs that hunted stayed on the bank. And then there was a race to determine which boy could get into the pond first and get hold of the big dog's tail or his hair. Then one boy would throw a stick out in the pond, and Leo would swim out and get the stick with one or two boys hanging on to him, yelling, splashing, and having a general big time. You should have been a boy and been there. When we all had enough, how slowly we dressed and walked back to the house. Leo would be quiet, and the minute we reached the yard, he stretched out in the shade of the big locust trees on the grass. Those were wonderful days, with no troubles, no money to spend, and no shows to go to. What entertainment we had, we made for ourselves. 5 boys on 1,000 acres of land, with dogs to hunt, coons to shoot, and horses to ride. Try that sometime, not needing money and picture shows. You can imagine those 5 boys getting into plenty of trouble and doing things that were terrible. But we had a certain code of honor. Each boy must pay the price for what he did and tell the truth to Mother. She was our judge and jury, and she was always just and fair to us. We were taught to be respectful to human beings, even the colored people who worked on the place. Mother taught us a code of honor, which was most important. There was a certain code like taking your hat off when speaking to a lady, and always respecting the dignity of others, even if you did not agree with them. So we developed the habit of treating her like a lady. She called this code being a gentleman. But boys are boys, and they get into troubles, some less, some more. I was unfortunate, for trouble came easy for me, or perhaps I was full of life, and was a little too smart sometimes. For instance, there were the big white cat we called Snow and the possum. One morning, we were just looking around to see what we could do. It happened that 2 or 3 days before we had caught a possum and had him in a flour barrel. How they laid this on to me? And perhaps they were right, but all the boys were very willing to help. So we took the cat and the possum and put each one into a burlap sack and left the sacks open. Then we tied the possum's tail and the cat's tail together, put them across the clothesline, and pulled the sacks off. Of all the fights you ever saw, it happened right there. The possum had a big mouth and large teeth, but the cat had a vicious claw. The blood and fur began to fly, and we were dancing around and yelling our heads off when the back door to the house opened and Mother's voice said, "Boys!" All of us stopped and stood up straight, like a shot. Not a sound except the fight going on. "Frank, cut those brutes down!" The cat was gone, and the possum in the barrel in less than a minute. "Now, come inside." We knew we were in for it, but that was a wonderful fight to see. The poem about the gingham dog and the calico cat eating each other up had nothing on this fight. The punishment was not too severe, and never was. What disturbed me about those lectures we got was that I was looked on as the troublemaker until it was proved otherwise, which was sometimes hard to do. I learned slowly that those who dance must pay the fiddler. After you pay for misdeeds by hoeing weeds in the sun. For an hour, you get careful, but I would pay the price any time to see a fight like that. Somewhere in those years I began to have malaria fever, chills, and fever in country talk, and it was to stay with me for years. It was never very dangerous, with me at least, but it is still bad for anyone's health. Did you ever have a congestive chill and shake the bed until it rattled? Then that green bile would come up in spite of you. Even Hercules could not have kept it down. And every 7, 14, 21 days, it was sure to come back and do it all over again. Chills and fever meant Dr. Latany. He would make his rounds about every week, and many a time I have watched him make up a bottle of rhubarb and calomel pills for all of us. Then we all took quinine in the mosquito season, which was most of the summer. Dr. Latany would tie up his saddle horse at the horse rack in the front yard, bring his saddlebags in, take out a small square plate, measure some rhubarb, then some calomel, and mix them. Then he would call for some cornbread and make pills out of the mixture, and we used the pills. I do not know if he washed his hands or not. I suppose every doctor has his own habit in the matter. Dr. Latany was our doctor, and also our nearest neighbor. He was a fine man, and the two families visited back and forth. He was kind to us. He died at the Latany home, somewhere near 1889. As we grew to be bigger, we had more and more to do. More responsibility was placed on us. We fed the stock, and a daily chore in the wintertime was the firewood for the kitchen and rooms in the house. The woodyard was a help to me. It is where I got my health and strength that has carried me along up to 81 years. About this time, Edmund, Wright, and I were each given a certain amount of land to cultivate, and we had all we raised on this ground. After the land was plowed, we cultivated the crop with a big old gentle ox we named Spot. We worked him single in cultivating whatever was planted. He was big, gentle, and powerful. One boy would drive, and one boy would hold the cultivator. Now this old ox would be going along, and we would be cutting up the weeds when suddenly he would lower his head, run out his tongue, take in the best hill of corn in the patch, and eat it. How we would fight him and kick and whip, but it did no good when he saw a fine hill of corn. He always took it if he wanted to. Perhaps it was good for us to know that we could not have everything just as we wanted it. Edmund was sickly and did not have much strength, so my younger brother Wright and I would do his share of hard work. It seems I fitted in on all counts. There were 2 boys older and 2 boys younger than I. The swimming pond was a popular place in the afternoon after we had worked in the crops in the morning. We took delight in bathing and fishing. We had a small platform we had built out into the water to get into deeper water for fishing, as on the edge of the pond, a growth of lilies and reeds grew where it was shallow water. One day 3 of us were fishing, and I was sitting on the end of the platform fishing when a moccasin snake attempted to swim out around me and go down the pond. Well, I saw a chance, flipped the fishing line over his back, and pulled the fish hook hard into him. Now, you should have seen that fight, me with the fishing pole and line hauling the snake up out of the water. The other boys were yelling and running to the shore to get clubs. I slowly got back to the shore, and the boys were trying to hit the snake, being careful not to get too close for the water. Moccasin is dangerous. This one was hooked in the middle of his back and had put up quite a fight. Someone hit him on the head, and the fight was over. That was a glorious shindig, and we got a lecture about taking such a chance. But boys take chances and think afterwards. What would you have done? Would you have tried to hook the snake? Those were wonderful days. We did not need an automobile as we only went to the post office and store once in a while. Our home had a fenced yard. Inside the fence was a circle drive leading from the gate in front of the house up to the porch. The yard was grass, except the circle, for here the road was 3 inches lower with no grass. In the middle of the circle was a rock flower garden, and there were a number of big locust trees in the front yard and big mulberry trees in back of the house. From the yard gate, a road ran for 1/2 mile up to the main country road, so any company that came to see us were visible about 1/2 mile. The fence around the yard had a cedar post every 10 feet, with 4 boards nailed on them about 1 foot apart. The posts had a board in front of them to cover where the joints were. Everything fitted just right, and all of it was whitewashed and kept clean. Now, whitewash is fine when it is fresh and put on like paint with no streaks. We were supposed to keep the weeds and grass out of the drive circle and the fence white. Now, when there were 5 boys, and the 2 older ones gave orders, and the 2 younger ones were too small, who was an expert with a whitewash brush after a while? I know just how Tom Sawyer worked the gang by letting them look at his sore toe. There were always weeds to hoe. Virginia grows weeds wholesale, crops retail, and eats the best of everything. Frank, Miss Jenny Croxton will be here for dinner and will stay several days, so put on your shoes and a clean shirt, my mother would say. The shoes were put on after the chickens were caught. It took a roadrunner of a chicken to get away when there were no shoes around, because Frank loved fried chickens. And fried chicken meant there would likely be sweet potatoes and hot biscuits and butter. No little pats on a big plate, but a full pound of golden butter. We had a wonderful life, and one of its great virtues was the spirit of friendship. It was the trust that pervaded all our actions. There is where I learned that money was a small word, and friendship was the big thing in life. The colored people felt the same way, and all that worked on the old plantation had our well-being at heart. Else Jenny Croxton was a good friend of my mother, and I thought her the queen of the country. She was the daughter of Thomas Croxton, who had been the lawyer for the Noel family for years. He was later county judge of the court. Mother would visit in Tappahannock, and had many friends there. People from all over Essex County stopped at Painfield and stayed days at a time. There was a feeling in the country that people had time to enjoy life, and were not here to rush through it. So I grew up with the idea that we had time to do what we wanted, and I still believe that way. Perhaps the old plantation life was happy and carefree and good for people. When we were small, the stockings hung up in front of the fireplace at Christmas time. Always the visitors, even the colored people from around the neighborhood, went to the big place on Christmas. They would come up with a big smile and say, "Des come over to see the white folks." They meant they wanted the white folks to see that they were there, for there must be some small present. Later, when we were bigger, we had our particular friends come out, and always the big hunt was on. We would arrange to hunt a certain section and be at a certain place at noon. We would have some man that was working on the place meet the gang with the buggy and lunch. What a gang! Sometimes there were 10 boys with 6 or 7 guns and dogs to trail rabbits and squirrels. My younger brother Hambleton would stay with me after he got big enough to go, and all our lives we have been very close friends, as well as brothers. When we got home, what a dinner we would sit down to. It did not matter how many were there, for some of the colored people stayed, and they all were cooks. The food just kept coming in until all were taken care of. The colored people had their dinner in the kitchen where all the colored help ate. The white family ate in the dining room. Our friends generally stayed several days. So far, we boys did not have any troubles. Life was joyous and happy. As we grew older, Mother spent more time with us. She had us have a study hour in the evening, and our education was first always. She was an educated woman, and she was trying to raise 5 boys to be men. No one was more capable than she was. She had the quiet authority that some possess. In dealing with us, her first thought was justice. After justice came whatever the circumstances required. We developed the habit of telling the truth to Mother. She had the faculty of getting the truth under any circumstances. She was our judge and court. We held her in high honor. We loved her, trusted her, and obeyed her. She taught us to read good books, and often read to us. She was a religious woman, and taught us that life was just, and what was sowed was what we could expect to receive. Her whole life was given to our care and the welfare of the home. She taught us a code of honor that has been the guiding influence of my life. She taught us the rights and dignity of man, and to have some ideal to look up to. She taught us that we had a proud and honorable name, and to live so that we would lay it down as we had received it. All my life, one of my safeguards has been, what would she think of what I did? Many times that has been what saved me. When I lost her, I was 18 years old. All my interest in life, and all my hope in heaven and earth, was gone. For years I was dissatisfied, rebellious of what life gave me, and finally in my desperation I came west. After I had spent some years in the West doing everything to kill time, life was really kind to me. Once more, and I met a lovely, gracious spirit that made life a different question, that brought hope and sunshine to me, that proved to be the influence that made life worth living. Mother taught us in a religious sense that life was serious and that it was up to us what we made of it. She taught us the 10 Commandments, and the Sermon on the Mount was religion, and that to have a philosophy of faith, hope, and charity was necessary to combat evil. 2 women, my mother and my wife, have been the influences that have been the guiding influences in all my life, and still are. As we grew bigger, we had to have better schools, so sometime about my 15th to 16th-year-old period, Edmund and I were sent to Aberdeen Academy, 20 miles from home, where I finished my education going to the academy. I went my first year with Edmund, and the last year with Wright, my younger brother. Here at Aberdeen, I learned to study. In English and Latin and history, I was only fair, but in mathematics, I held my own. I took pride in arithmetic, algebra, and geometry. In those old days, these subjects were first, but later students turned to the professions or to art as they were inclined. Then Mother's health began to fail, and a change came to us and to the old plantation. The happy days were a thing of the past, and life was hard on us. We had been raised in a little kingdom of our own with happiness and plenty, and suddenly all was changed. We 4 older boys got jobs in Baltimore, and Mother did some traveling to places where the doctors thought conditions for fighting the dread plague tuberculosis, which she had, were better, but to no benefit, and she, like my father, slowly got weaker and weaker. In September 1891, she died at Anna Arundel, Maryland. About that time, the Painfield plantation was sold, and the 4 older boys had jobs in Baltimore. Our uncles, Mother's brothers, were good to us, but they were city people and we were country boys. And as for me, life had lost all interest and desire. Those were black days for me, and I was a disappointment to my uncles. Henry went to Atlanta, Georgia. Edmund had a job at the Hambleton Bank in Baltimore, and I was working for the West Virginia Central Railroad with offices in Baltimore, Maryland. Then Henry developed lung trouble, and the doctors told him to go west. I gladly agreed to go with him, and my hated office days were over. Hambleton was at school in Alexandria, Virginia, but he and Edmund were in time destined to join Henry and me in the West at Fruitland, New Mexico. John Wright Noel, a younger brother, was born at Painfield, Virginia. July 21st, 18,714. He was only 18 months younger than I was, and we grew up as pals in all respects. We were almost the same size, and even in school we were together and went to Aberdeen Academy together. He was a more forceful character than I, but all our lives together, about 20 years, we balanced each other and were pals. When we were together, there was nothing looked too big to us. He grew up to be a fine, high-principled man, and was always a joy and pride to me. Many a fracas we have gone through together. We have played together many a ball game. Many a fight with other gangs we have fought together. But when we were together, our courage was high, and our muscles always good. After Mother's death, Fright worked hard at his job, and Edmund and I had to settle up with him each payday for money we had borrowed. Life was tough for us country-raised boys in a big city. Wright was more determined in character and was good in mathematics. He concluded to be an engineer. Soon after I went west, he went to Central America with an engineering party. I never saw him after I came west. He died in Central America about 1892, and life had dealt me another hard blow. Edmund Hambleton. Noel was the second son. He was born the 6th of December, 1871. Because of being frail, he didn't start school until he was 8 years old. His schooling started at Painfield in 1879. After coming west, his health improved, and while he never married, he lived to be 80 years old. Chapter 2. Henry R. Noel and Frank L. Noel go west. On our trip from Baltimore, we went through Chicago. We attended a celebration of the Grand Army of the Republic and spent time enough there to inspect the Chicago stockyards and saw beef and sheep butchered there. Then on to Las Vegas, New Mexico. We landed in Las Vegas, New Mexico sometime in the fall of 1892, and life took a decided downturn for both of us for the next few years. I remember getting off the train at Las Vegas and meeting a Pueblo Indian. He was a small man with a blanket around him, which was held by a belt at the waist and pulled around the shoulders. Now I had read quite a number of James Fenimore Cooper's novels about the noble red man, such as The Last of the Mohicans, The Deerslayer, etc. So you can imagine my looking at that little dirty blanketed Indian as the noble red man. We were in Las Vegas about a week when in came 2 hunters with a string of burros loaded with 15 deer they were selling. They were John Albright and Horace Yeoman. We were curious and went down to their camp. After several visits, they offered to take us out to camp at so much a month. We accepted and spent the winter up in the snow near Santa Fe. We spent a good winter hunting deer, and Henry seemed to recover his health and strength. The next summer we prospected with the same camp outfit, and here is where Henry developed his future desire in life, prospecting. This was to occupy him in the last years of his life. Prospecting is an obsession that fastens on some, and they drop everything in life and hunt for gold. Now Henry was in line to do this very thing, but not before he and I had passed through some tough times. The next fall, a rumor spread of gold on the San Juan River, where it runs through Utah. So, we 2 Noel brothers and Albright and Yeoman outfitted ourselves at Albuquerque, New Mexico, and started for the San Juan River. From Albuquerque to a Mexican town called Cobazone, or La Posta, which is on our road, is 60 miles. We made that all okay when trouble started. The night we camped at Cobazone, Henry went out to the woodpile to get wood to cook with, and in cutting through snow on the log, he slipped and struck the corner of the axe into his shin bone. We should have stopped there, but we were young and thought 5 ourselves tough. So on we went for 40 miles to Rock Springs, a trading post owned by G. Bennett. When we reached Rock Springs, Henry was in pain and had fever. Albright and Yeoman decided to go on, so we kept our 2 horses. Mrs. B. J. Bennett did what she could for Henry, but the leg got worse and more painful. Then Bennett went to Albuquerque and brought back medicine and instructions about Henry. I was cooking for Henry and washing his wound. The instructions said to mix some oil and carbolic acid in certain quantities, make a swab, and swab the wound every 3 hours. All went well for a few days without much change. Then one night I made the mistake of putting the swab into the carbolic acid bottle instead of the mixture. The next morning, when I dressed the wound, the inside of it came out, leaving a raw hole in the leg, and Henry began to get better and was soon well. About this time, Bennett got a letter about the gold discoveries we had started out to see, and we began to take an interest in trading with the Indians. The upshot of this was we bought Bennett out, and he moved on. Edmund had been writing to us, and he came out about then and joined us. Then began a life as Indian trader and storekeeper, but times were bad, and were to get worse. Edmund got a job somewhere, and Henry and I loaded what we had in the shape of wool and pelts that we had spent the winter buying, and took everything to Ilfeld Brothers at Albuquerque. We were informed that wool and pelts were almost worthless, but if we would turn in everything we had, they would write off the account, and all sides would call it square. They were near going broke, but later made a fortune in the same business. So we learned the hard way about phonies. This was when Grover Cleveland was president. The next morning, Henry and I did without breakfast, for there was no money. However, there was a camp outfit in town looking for men to do road work, and I put on my best suit and applied. The boss looked me over and said, "No," but I had been taught that a man is never beat until he is beat in his own heart and gives up, which I have never done. I put on my working clothes and went back to the straw boss. After hearing my story, he signed me on and gave me an advance to get what I needed. So I started work, and as I was strong and a good worker, I got along okay. My philosophy tells me, if you accept a man's money, earn it, not quit the job. Did you ever have the experience of waking up in the morning with no money, no home, no father, no mother, a hard and rebellious spirit, no interest in life, and knowing you were living a life of no purpose and no hope? All that saved me in those black days was the memory of my mother. She must have been close, for it would have been easy to take the path of least resistance and become a member of the underworld. As time went on, Henry got to know a Spanish traveling man, and when we received the last few dollars from the Painfield estate, this drummer went in with us, and we started a store in Nacimiento, New Mexico. At Nacimiento we did well. Almost too well. As the word was out that we were making money, soon a rich Mexican came into the community. We should have known when the traveling partner wanted to sell that something was in the wind. However, we bought his share, and he departed. He soon put in a large store, and we were slowly pushed out. While we were making our last try to hang on, the clerk, Buck Franz, and another friend, Jack Martin, heard from an old friend of Martin's, John Williams, at Holbrook, Arizona. The word was, "Gold, come quick and locate." Buck Franz, Jack Martin, and F.L. Noel put 4 horses on a wagon and started. 6. It was to be the hardest trip I ever took. We traveled down to Albuquerque, and then over the Continental Divide to Gallup, passing through Gallup about 3 in the afternoon. There was snow on the ground then, and we knew the wind was going to be bad, but for some reason they laughed at me when I suggested camping at Gallup. They were used to storms, so we pushed on and had only gone 4 miles up onto a big flat mesa when the wind increased, and soon the snow began to fall in a driving storm that the horses could not face, and we could not see the road. The cold was bitter with no time to do anything, and a camp was out of the question on account of the wind. We turned the wagon broadside to the wind, unhooked the horses, tied them on the side out of the wind, took off their harnesses, put the horse blankets on then, and then had to put the harness back on to hold the blankets down. The wind was a gale by now, and would have tipped the wagon over but for the fact that feed for the horses and our camp made a good load and weighted the wagon down. In those days, any trip like we were on had to have a wagon with 5 bows on it to hold a wagon canvas stretched over them and drawn together at each end. This gave room inside the canvas for a large load, if necessary. We opened one bed, and taking the blankets and quilts, we put them under the canvas and over the bows so the wind did not reach us. We lit some candles we had and let the wind howl, and it howled up until midnight when the wind quieted. The snow and sleet rattled the wagon canvas and kept up a din like shot hitting the wagon. We were warm and comfortable, but there was no sleep until the wind quieted down. In the morning it was cold and plenty of snow. Some drifts were hard to get through. We fed the horses grain, and then hooked up and pushed on until we came to timber country and water. Then we camped to give the horses hay and water, and cooked a real breakfast for ourselves. That was our worst night, but the cold was still with us. We traveled about 25 or 30 miles a day, and camped where the wood was plentiful. It seemed here is where age was respected to an extreme. Martin was 50 and getting gray. He fed the horses. Franz was over 40. He did the cooking. I was 19, so it is easy to figure who cut the wood and packed the water. When I was young, I had plenty of muscle, and it seemed it was easy for some to impose on me. But all my life I have had good luck and found men human, which is all we can expect. Martin and Frank were both very good in their line, and whenever real trouble was on, they took their full share. After several days, we reached Holbrook, Arizona, a town on the Colorado River, much lower and much warmer than Nacimiento. There was no snow, and the railroad ran through the town. There was bad news for us from Williams, the friend of Martin. The Gold Camp part of the town could find gold and pan color in any of the sandbars along the river, but the gold was very flaky and light and not profitable for working men to handle. We fooled around for a week, and by that time it was necessary for us to help out on the grub in the Williams home. As always, the question of money got more and more pressing. South of Holbrook, about 60 miles, is the Tonto Basin country that Zane Grey wrote about. The only way to get into the Tonto Basin Valley then was by pack train. Tonto Basin got their mail at Holbrook. There was quite a mountain country between Tonto Basin and Holbrook. The Tonto country was on the south side of this mountain country, but from Holbrook to foothills of the mountain was flat cattle range and warm country. Now the mail route had a cabin on the trail up on the mountain, and on both sides of the cabin the trail was plainly blazed by cuts on the trees. It seems the mail contractor had been caught on this mountain by the same blizzard that hit us at Gallup, New Mexico. He lost the mail sacks and almost his life before he was compelled to turn back. His feet were so badly frozen that he had to quit. The postmaster knew the Tonto people were getting peeved that Uncle Sam did not get the mail through, and so the postmaster made a good offer of so much money to anyone who would take the letter, mail through, and give him time to find another party to contract the mail regularly. Council was held at the Williams home with Williams, Martin, Franz, and Noel present. After some talk, it was decided that Franz and Noel tackle the job. Williams had pack saddles, and Noel and Franz had good horses and riding saddles of their own. In those days, anything unusual was welcomed by me. The more unusual, the better. Any excitement was meat to me, and there was nothing to stop me and no ties holding me back. Well, a start was made. The weather was fine and warm, but we knew that we had to go over the mountain, and there would be snow. We made the cabin. A fine snow was about 12 inches deep. The cabin had been stocked with wood, and we soon had a fire. 2 saddle horses we rode, and 1 pack horse we led. The pack horse had the mail on one side, and grain for the horses on the other. Also 1 frying pan, some bacon, coffee, and 10 pounds of flour with the salt and baking powder already mixed in. We had plenty of snow for water, and the cabin had buckets and plenty of wood. We spent a good long night sleeping in front of the fire as we reached the cabin at dusk. Supper consisted of coffee, flapjacks, and bacon. In the morning, there was more of the same. Then we began to climb over the mountain. Not many miles, but steep. The blazes on the trees were good, and we could follow the trail fine, but the snow got deeper and deeper. It reached 15 inches, and we knew soon the horses would be in trouble. Franz would ride first for a while. Then I would push past and lead for a while. It was slow going, but fine weather, and we knew we could go back to that cabin if we failed to get to the top. It was quite a climb, and the snow was to get to 24 inches, but no deeper. We hung on till finally there was a break in the timber, and suddenly we were on top and looking down into Tonto Basin. We were standing on a great rim rock that circled the whole vast basin. We could see men and horses and cattle down in the valley. A trail well blazed started down, and we commenced the steepest descent I ever traveled and the roughest. The trail zigzagged down into that valley for miles, and from the top men looked like boys. Quite a bunch of men had gathered by the time we were halfway down. For all the trail was in view from the valley, and the men knew we were packing in mail. Quite a bunch of hound dogs met us, and then a couple of riders came up a short distance. The people were glad to get the mail, and fed and took care of us with the best they had to offer. There was no charge, and we stayed over a day to let the horses fill up. Beef, chicken, hot cornbread, molasses, potatoes, and all root crops were grown there, but not much hay. Sorghum and cane were fed the livestock, which did in the place of hay, and they did well on it. The day we rested there, we rode down the valley for a while, and our guide said, "That's it. That's the tree." "What tree you talking about?" "This live oak here," he said, "was where the 7 cow rustlers were hanged." Did you ever see a tree 7 men were hanged on? You get a notion that any place is about as healthy as where you are. Zane Grey wrote quite a book about the Tonto Basin and told about that tree. Well, they are fine people in Tonto Valley, and they gave us the best they had. 8. The second day we started back, not by the zigzag trail, but by a longer grade, and came out into the cow country owned by the Hashed Knife outfit. We went into Holbrook on another road, got paid off, settled with Williams, and started back for Nacimiento. Holbrook, Arizona in the 1890s was a small place hard to get into and kept alive by cattlemen and a railroad section gang. The Santa Fe trains took on water there. It was hot in the summer, but very fine in the winter. On the Santa Fe in the early days, hobo travel and stealing were a pest and real hard to handle. The big trains would load coal in Gallup, New Mexico for fuel, both for the east and west hauls. I saw a train of coal come into Holbrook. It came to a stop, and the engine went to the water tank for water. In 2 minutes, there were 20 men on those cars throwing off lumps of coal. Then, at a signal, they climbed down and disappeared. As soon as the giant train of coal started on, the coal was picked up in sacks and taken to houses for fuel. The train crew saw nothing, heard nothing, and were not interested in any of the proceedings. Holbrook eventually came to be a great wool shipping point, as well as a cattle point. Our trip back to Nacimiento was a serious one for me, and a painful one. After we left Holbrook a couple of days and began to climb back up to Gallup, New Mexico, the whole country was covered with about 18 inches of snow, and our road was well broken, so we made good time. One evening I got the wood and was starting a fire when the sulfur from the match blew back into my eyes. I did not see anything for 3 days. I did have bad pain. It was fierce. I got a first-class case of snow blindness. I had felt it coming on, but did not know what it was until that evening. I had a big green silk handkerchief with me, and used that over my eyes, for I had no dark glasses. The pain from snow blindness is bad. It's a constant burning sensation that never lets up. The first night I did not sleep, and slept very little the next night. For 3 days the pain was tough. After that we passed through a town, and a doctor gave me some salve to use and some dark glasses. If you have never been snowblind, you do not know what real misery is. All other pain is just small potatoes. We came back to Nacimiento. My brother Henry had met a Mexican at Largo, a small Mexican village, have some goods, and Henry took a team, wagon, and harness in part payment. One horse of the team was to be quite a blessing to me. We called him Tony. He was a good saddler. We soon closed out all our interests in Nacimiento and moved out of the Mexican part of the state. We had been in Nacimiento about a year. We had learned a little Spanish and had had a pleasant experience trading with the Mexicans. They are easygoing people with no hurry, and they let life have its way without much struggle. They have certain feast days and religious celebration time. They play games and wind up with a dance. Their customs are different from the American way, and they have kept their code of religious life through the centuries, and are still not too much influenced by modern life. They are kindly and hospitable, and we had friends among them. Some Americans marry into Mexican families and have pleasant lives, but it did not appeal to me. Nothing did in those days, and I seemed to have no purpose in life and no ambition to make anything of myself. I just drifted and let any new idea occupy my mind for a while, or as long as it was pleasant. This is a dangerous state to get into, and leads to habits that are hard to get out of. I led a lazy, trifling existence for several years, and life seemed empty and useless. 9. We finally landed in Fruitland, New Mexico. I had a freight outfit and freighted from Durango, Colorado, and from Gallup, New Mexico, a distance of 150 miles. About this time, Edmund came back to us and lived with us at Fruitland. There was a bunch of English people who had settled at Fruitland, and several had ranches of their own. Only one family, the Colliers, was a married people. The rest were young bachelors, about 10 or 12 young men looking for homes. They took us into their gang, and for several years life was easy. Not much work, not much money, and not much ambition to do anything. I made many friends in those days among the English gang, and also among the Mormon settlers up and down the San Juan River. It was a fine community, and an easy place to live in. I look back now to those days, and it seems that playing baseball and horse racing occupied most of our time. Two of my best friends were Cyril J. Collier and Hugh Curry, fine young Englishmen and well-educated. But what was better, they both had a fine, honest outlook on life and lived on a code of honesty. Hugh Curry owned a place of his own, and he and his brother Mark ranched and raised some cattle. Hy was a fine man physically, and he was on the same baseball team as I was. We played many a game together, went to many a race together, and worked on many a job together. Hugh married a Farmington girl, and was in the government service as a forest ranger in Colorado for years. He was a fine man with not much religion, but a man of honor and a good citizen. Cyril J. Collier was a different type. He was a small man, but a fine man mentally and morally. He and his brother, Percy, owned a ranch and farmed to quite an extent. Percy was married, had a family, and after a year or two of America went back to England and stayed there. But Cyril was my pal and friend. He married a Fruitland girl, raised a fine family, and finally joined the Mormon Church. He was, and is, a fine man. He is still living in Fruitland, New Mexico. Many others I called friends, and many families we visited with, and they were kind and hospitable to us. About this time, Edmund H. Noel, my brother, joined us. Henry and I had some property by that time. We had tents, horses, wagons, and equipment, and lived on Cyril J. Collier's place. When Edmund joined us, we rented places, worked at most any job, lived as we wanted to, and wasted some valuable years doing nothing. In those days, we had a baseball circuit of towns in Colorado and New Mexico. I was on the Fruitland 9 and was well known all over that section. For in those days, we had time to play as well as work, and money was not so necessary as it is now. In those days, we lived close to the earth and did not choose the dollar. We saw no automobiles and very few picture shows. In fact, we lived out in the sticks and did as country folks do. We would have big ball games, one town against another. There was always a big dance after the games, and on some trips there was an overnight stay. All of Fruitland patted me on the back because I made it my special business to see that Fruitland won the baseball games, or our fair share of them, and we generally were near the top. About this time, when I was near 21 years old, I got a job for a firm named Frank Leland George English at Cripple Creek, Colorado. I worked there for about 6 months. It was hard work and small pay, delivering water, but it was better than nothing to do it 1-2 Gray Hills. When I returned to Fruitland, New Mexico, I decided it was time to make some line of work permanent and have an object in life. This developed into my working into the store business on the Navajo reservation. One who was in this business was called an Indian trader. This meant running a store on the government-owned Navajo Indian reservation, and called for a government license and quite a bond. There was a man in the Fruitland country named Joe Wilkins, who had traded with the Indians before as Henry Noel, my brother, and I had done. Wilkins was a gambler and horse racer. He had sold one store on the reservation some time before and was near the end of his resources. So the three of us, Junior R. Wilkins, H. R. Noel, and F. L. Noel, combined our capital, and I started the trading post known as 2 Gray Hills, located 50 miles southwest from Fruitland and 75 miles north from Gallup, New Mexico. We secured a license from the government, loaded 2 wagons with tools and equipment, and moved to a bench we called 2 Gray Hills on the bank of an arroyo. This arroyo ran water for about 1 month in the year from the mountain 2 miles west of us, when the snow melted in the spring. The balance of the year we used a spring in the same arroyo. Here we set up a big tent and started business. From that time on, I was a busy man. I had 2 big, fine teams and 2 wagons, and freighted most of our supplies in and out of Gallup, New Mexico, 75 miles away. We freighted in lumber to build with and goods to trade with the Indians. H. R. Noel and J. R. Wilkins, with Indian help, made sun-dried adobes 8 inches by 12 inches, while I hauled rock for the foundation, lumber for floors, windows and doors, and roofing for the building. There was plenty of work, but also plenty of good food, including mutton and beef. After a while, we had a building of 2 rooms, 1 big room, which was the store proper, and a small room for cooking, etc. We moved in just before cold weather came. All that fall and winter, my bedroom was where the bedroll landed when it came off the freight wagon, and sometimes the snow was deep and cold. What does it matter if life is rough when you are 23? and have begun to have dreams, dreams of making a home of your own. Chapter 3. Making a Home. I had in my heart the desire to have a home of my own. I believe all have this desire, but in some it is greater than in others. Some like to travel more than others and see the bright lights. They are never satisfied and want more and more company. To me, the magic word was, is and always has been home. Sometime before the store was started, I had met a girl in Fruitland named Mary Eliza Roberts, and she was to prove to be the greatest blessing in my life. She was able to fulfill all my desires for home, and has made the word home even more dear to me than it had been when I first met her. She is still the sunshine of my home, and has been for 56 years. I was attracted to her the first time we met, but I was only a poor trader and had nothing to offer anyone. But when the store began to prosper, the deep desire for a home began to start in my mind, and life began to take on a new meaning. This girl was a baseball player herself, and seemed to take pride in me when we won a game. We went to many games and dances together. I could see that she was working not for herself only, but to help out a large family. They all had to work and help each other. Thus, the financial state of both of us was 50-50, besides having our baseball interest in common. We knew each other for 2 years before anything serious was thought of, and we were one more year getting ready. One day in June of 1897, I left 2 Gray Hills riding a race mare given to me by Giles Masters. The mare was named Flaxie and was a good size and a splendid saddler. I left early to go to Fruitland 50 miles distance and reached the river in the afternoon. When I came to the river was high, and quite a crowd of people were on the other side. They tried to tell me something, but due to the noise of the water, I could not hear. In the crowd I could see the Roberts girl. They were quite excited when I rode up to the riverbank and called directions to me. Now I knew the river. Also I knew the horse I was riding, and I knew myself. So in we went, and as we battled that river, there was not a sound. But when I was almost over in shallow water, they yelled and caned to the water's edge. When I got on the ground, Bert Dustin said, "Here," and gave me a horse he had. May Roberts got on Flaxie. I rode Bert Dustin's horse. We were gone. Hardly a word had I spoken, and she did not speak until we were quite out of the crowd. Well, when we came back from that ride, we knew what life would mean to us. It would mean a home somewhere. I could have crossed all the rivers in America. 2 days later, I rode back to the store and told Henry I was thinking of getting married. He was quite upset and said I had no house, but from that day, I began to build. The 2 Gray Hills store changed hands. J.R. Wilkins, one of the members of the 3 owners, sold out his interest to the Noel brothers and departed. In the spring of 1897, I started to build a home about 100 feet from the big store building and put up a very nice log house made of pine logs about 5 inches thick, with the bark pulled off while green, which left them white. They were fitted at each corner. In the end, I had a nice room, 16 by 16. Henry and I used this little building as a kitchen and living room. I hauled the logs down from the mountain about 7 miles away. The roofing, lumber, doors, and windows from Gallup, New Mexico, 75 miles away, and other supplies from Durango, Colorado, 100 miles away. These were in the days of the 4-horse wagon freight, which traveled over a desert country with a wagon track for a road, some parts of which were constantly being covered by wind-blown sand. It took 10 days to go to Durango and back, and 6 days to Gallup and back. This little house was not finished until the summer of 1898. Two Gray Hills, 1897 to 8810. All this time I was returning to the dream that I could have a home like the one I was raised in, and that it would be mine. The store was only a way of supplying what I wanted. My big desire was to establish a home. After I had frozen in the winter, or fried in the summer, and had about all I could take, I would saddle a horse and pay a visit to Fruitland, New Mexico. These trips to Fruitland were all that saved me, all that made life worth living, all that kept me from joining the army or doing some other stunt just as bad. For in Fruitland lived Mary E. Roberts, and she would go horseback riding with me. When we sat down and talked about the little house, then is when I got the courage and strength to go on with my resolution to have a home of my own. We were married October 3rd, 1898, at Jackson, New Mexico. We got into a rig, drove 15 miles, and had a dance that night at Fruitland, New Mexico. About 4 o'clock in the morning of October 4th, we drove across the San Juan River in a wagon driving 2 horses and started a new life. When we crossed the river and started out on a 50-mile trip to the home that had been prepared at the trading store, both of us knew that life was taking a turn away from our fun-loving and carefree days, and that we had accepted the full responsibility that comes to all young couples when they decide to have a home of their own. That was the turning point of my life, and the most sensible thing that I ever did. The home became a reality, and all our hopes of raising a family and keeping our name for future records has been granted more than our wildest dreams looked for in those days. On October 4th, 1898, we were camped on the desert between Fruitland, New Mexico, and Gallup, New Mexico, traveling in a wagon and going to Two Gray Hills, the trading post I half owned. We reached the store about 2 p.m. and moved into the little house I had built that summer. The house was built of logs with mud plaster between logs and a roof of lumber and mud, then dirt to make it cool in summer and warm in winter. Our furniture was most primitive. The cupboards, consisting of case goods boxes with shelves fitted into them and curtains, a stove, bed, and chairs. The water used was a spring about 150 yards from the house, and I was expert carrying water with 2 large buckets and an iron hoop. Now, believe it or not, this was all we needed, and all we had for some time. You have to go through this to realize that every move you make is just so much in building a home. You really get to appreciate every convenience if necessity makes you make them yourself. Soon, the place looked different. There were white curtains and paint on the window frame and door, and the floor got its first real scrubbing, and the man learned to get the mud off his shoes when the weather was bad. The man learned lots of new tricks like having buttons on his clothes and putting on a clean white shirt every day or so. This new life seemed to agree with both the man and the woman, for she learned, like the man, that making a home was hard work, but had happiness as its reward. The woman was one of the salt of the earth, and put all her energy in making this little home a place of happiness and a haven of rest for the man. There was a regular time for meals. A banjo was played, songs were sung, and laughter was always present. One great blessing she originated was that 2 people get along better when they sit down and consult with no one giving any orders, but both parties yielding to the wishes of the other on a 50-50 basis, and it has always been that way. The man learned that his hat must be put up when he was in the house, that his feet must be clean when he came into the house, that the water buckets must not go dry, or the wood box get empty, that the woman liked to be asked to go places like horseback riding, and even on the trips for freight, that it was good medicine to tell his wife what was in his mind, such as her being the prettiest girl he ever saw. The woman learned that a man was a stubborn, unreasonable animal, but that he did have the idea to treat her right in the long run. She learned to manage him in a way he least suspected, such as making requests just after a dinner of hot biscuits and butter, not before dinner. She learned that the best medicine in all the world is love and consideration for others. More than that, she taught the man to look for the good in life and to give back what he received. That splendid medicine is good to take and works up to this day. My brother, Henry, was at the store when we got there, and a man named Fisher who helped clerk in the store. Soon, life settled down to a regular routine. Henry commenced to drive the freight wagon, and I did most of the clerking in the store. Mary soon learned to help me in trading with the Indians, and they liked her at once. She helped me through many a bad day. The store, like the house, soon took on a better look with some paint, a few curtains, cleaner shelves, and for a change it was swept and dusted. We had quite a lot of work to keep the store up to date, and Mary became an expert in arranging the shelves and showcases and keeping them full at all times. When trade was good in the spring because of wool season, we would have big days, and when we closed at night, we went to the little house, had supper, and went to bed. The next morning early, Mary would get breakfast while I worked in the store. As a general rule, trade would be light until noon, the busiest hours being from 1 to 5 p.m. This was a busy time, and we worked hard. Besides the water 11 being quite a problem, there was also the problem of wood being cut for the two stoves, the cook stove in the living house and the heater in the store. Did you ever cut wood with an axe for two fires, and one of them a big one? If you have, you know why I say we worked hard. In the summer of this year, we bought quite a number of sheep at the Two Gray Hills store, also some cattle. An Indian would come in and say he had sheep in the corral for sale. I would have to call Mary from our room to stay in the store while I bought the sheep. She soon learned the prices, and, by the Indian pointing at what he wanted, she did a lot of trading without much talking. This arrangement worked well. After I had made the deal for the sheep, both Mary and I would be in the store, and sometimes trade would be good. Dinner or supper could always wait until after trade was through, or at least light. The storeroom was about 25 feet by 15. Also, there was a pelt and wool room and a general storage room to unload goods, price, and mark them, and then put them on the shelves and in the showcases in the main store. There was a big door in the middle of the big store which opened into what we called the bullpen, a space 10 by 12 feet, with a counter 4 feet high on 3 sides and falling on our end with a gate in it. In this way, the Indians did not go around the shelves with the goods, but everything asked for was placed on the counter, which was about 3 feet wide, and if they bought, it was paid for then. As a rule, the trader dealt with each Indian until he was through, and then some other Indian would start to buy. The Navajo Indians made blankets, some of which were valuable, and it took quite a little money to handle the blanket business, which was the most particular part of the whole trade. An Indian would come in and put a sack in which there was a high-priced blanket on top of the counter. The storekeeper would take out of the sack the blanket, roll it out on the counter, and take his time about deciding what it was worth. To be taken into consideration were the size and the weave, whether there were faults, whether it was of fine or coarse weave, wool warp or cotton warp, etc. The trader kept the blanket on hand to sell. Some of the blankets were light, well-woven, and beautiful, and the price was high. Some were coarse and heavy and sold much cheaper. Saddle blankets sold from $2.50 to $4 average rug-size blankets, from $5 up to $25. Your success as a trader depended on your ability to classify that blanket. After you decided what the blanket was worth, you put the number of dollars you were willing to pay on the counter beside the blanket, and then the trader kept his eye on the deal. If the Indian took the money, the trader rolled up the blanket and put it under the counter. If the Indian took down the blanket, the trader put the money back into the drawer. Sometimes not a word was spoken by either party. These blankets were cards and shipped to curio dealers, drugstores, and blanket stores all over the United States. In the wintertime, when snow and cold made blanket weaving less profitable, the Indians were allowed to pawn their beads, silver bridles, and belts to the traders. In this trading, no money was used. 2 tickets were made out for the article pawned. One the trader kept. The other was given to the Indian. In the spring, when the Indian sheared his sheep, he redeemed his pawned stuff. 1213. About this time, the Navajos numbered about 30,000, had their own reservation, and were self-supporting. They were charges of the United States government, and in times of famine or serious trouble of any kind, the government stepped in and helped them. There were a number of government agencies on the reservation. Each agency had schools and a system of Indian police that helped to keep order. The agent was also judge of his district. The trading store had to give a bond to the government. In my case, it was $10,000. Each raiding store was inspected by government inspectors at least once a year. Any trouble between the Indians and the traders was taken to the government agent of that district, and in most cases a settlement was reached. The Navajos in those days were allowed to raise what sheep, goats, cattle, and horses they could, and they raised corn, beans, melons, and some fruit. Some years, when the season was unusually dry, they would have rough going. They raised a corn that was all the colors of the rainbow, won the same ear, and was drought-resistant. In the fall, when the corn matured, they would have their tribal feasts and ceremonial dances. They were always having horse races in the warm weather. The different religious denominations had missions among the Navajos, and spent much time and money helping to educate and civilize them. Some of the big missions had a doctor and schools. The spring of this year, we bought lots of wool at 2 Gray Hills. We had developed a system of having the Indians do some of the freighting with their wagons. Mary had a sick spell of German measles later in the summer, and I had to take her into Farmington to her mother's family. This was not very serious, and we were soon back at the store. Later that same year, we were both in Durango, Colorado, for her an operation. It was while she was in Durango that my younger brother, Hamilton B. Noel, came over from Baltimore, Maryland. He was having consumption and had suffered several hemorrhages from his lungs. I remember being in Durango with Mary when we got a telegram Hamilton would be coming train. I met the train but missed seeing Hamilton, so walked back to the hotel. When I went in, there was a sickly man talking to Mary. I walked up but did not recognize Hamilton, and Mary finally told me, "This is Hamilton, your brother." I was shocked at his appearance and told her that night he would likely die soon. However, we put him on the stage and drove our own team to 2 Gray Hills 100 miles away. Then began a regular system of exercises and trips for Hamilton to try to save his life. That winter was a hard one, and I made several cold trips for goods, as the Indians' horse were poor and could not work. The next spring, Hamilton was better. He began to walk around the country and play horseshoes. He finally had a pony and took horseback rides. Our move to Kirtland. We decided that this store life was not very satisfactory on account of Mary's health, and Henry and I did not have the same ideas about running a store. Mary and I owned 40 acres with a house on it at Kirtland, New Mexico, that I purchased from William White, a stranger who had located in Kirtland, which we had rented. Edmund had a place near my 40 acres of the place he was living on, and he finally lost to us. Matters finally turned out that I sold my interest in the 2 Gray Hills and moved into the farm at Kirtland sometime in the spring of 1901. That summer was spent working at Kirtland, and that September Clara, our first child, was born, and we thought life was really worth living. We spent the winter in Kirtland, Durango, Colorado, where I went up with Jess Knight to a railroad camp near the railroad, where I worked on a construction gang building a railroad grade. The pay was $4.50 per day for a man and team, and 10 hours work. We had 10 on the creek bank, and every morning I would take the team up to work on the grade and one down at 6 p.m. in the evening. We did well there. Finally, after 70 days following that team and scraper around, I was put in boss of a Mexican bunch and got more money. When it got cold, we went back to the store at Kirtland and spent a good winter. Did you ever spend 70 days driving a team on a scraper that you had to flip back every time just before loading and lift up every time it dumped? Try it. You will come out with muscles like wire rope. The next year I made a bad move and sold the Kirtland home and bought a place at Jackson 15 miles from Kirtland. I never moved onto the place I bought, but moved into the Joe Burnham home at Jackson. I got a job with a man named Jones on a place 3 miles above Jackson on the La Plata River, and rode up every morning from Jackson to work. On June 16th, Jenny was born. The weather was so hot and the house so poor that I hauled green cottonwood saplings 15 feet long and put up beside the house for shade. In another 6 weeks, we went up to the mountain where I logged for a sawmill. That fall, we worked until the snow drove us down. The next spring I rented the home place, worked hard, and made some money. We stayed there until March of the next year, when I made another bad deal and bought the old Burnham home in Fruitland. We moved in March. S.A. Noss T. That year a man named C.H. Algert moved to Fruitland. He was an Indian trader from Tuba City, Arizona. Algert put in a big stock of goods and built up a big trade. 14 things went bad on the Burnham place. There was no money, and I went out and worked for Joe Wilkins, who was running a trading store on the Indian reservation. This was the same Joe Wilkins who helped build the 2 Gray Hills store years before. I worked on and off for Wilkins for a year. He had a logging contract on the mountain near his store, and I logged all winter, and then worked in the store part of the time. Joe Wilkins was having trouble. His wife did not like the Indians, and wanted to move back to Farmington into her old friends' circle. I told C.H. Algert that I would like to buy the Wilkins store and deal with him as a supply house. He took me out to see the Wilkins place, and after some further work at Wilkins place, I bought the store and moved out and took charge in L905. We called it Sadi Nosti. This was the best deal I ever made. I was there for 10 years. My brothers Hambleton and Henry had by this time sold the 2 Gray Hills to Win Wetherill, and Hambleton had stayed with us some of the time at the store. Edmund had lost his place. He had gone to Arizona and had a job there. As soon as I got the new store and had put in a large stock of goods, I began to make money. And by working hard for a few years, I made a small stake. Hambleton and I worked for some time at the store before Mary and the family came out, but in a few months, we were all there and all busy. Hambleton had learned quite a lot about blankets from Win Wetherill, and he was a great help to me. He was a better judge of blankets than I was. We had by that time taught the Indians about using their own wagons to freight goods from Fruitland, a distance of 45 miles, and Gallup, a distance of 75 miles. We had a few chickens at the store just for eggs for our own use. One morning, when I heard the chickens in trouble and making quite a fuss, I took a rifle and went out to see what was going on. I got there just in time to see a Navajo dog kill a chicken, so I shot the dog. Not long afterwards, the old medicine man of the neighborhood came up. Hambleton saw him and said, "Step lightly. The old man is angry. He is so mad he is shaking." The Indian was named Bezo-Chi and lived close by. He started in on a long lingo that the dog watched his sheep and goats and drove away the coyotes, and that this was his range, and I would have to move out at once. When it was my turn to talk, I explained that I did not know the dog belonged to him, that I thought the dog was a stranger prowling around, killing anything he could eat, and that I thought I was doing the whole community a favor to kill said dog. However, since it was his dog, I would pay for him. I put some flour, sugar, coffee, tobacco, and $2 in cash in front of the Indian. He finally took the goods, shook hands, and said, "Sekisagai," friend. After that, we were friends, and we traded with him for years. We had many experiences at the store. Some of them were small and childish, and some of them serious. 2 different times United States soldiers were at the store to settle serious troubles. The family and I stayed on, and were not molested by the Indians. At this time, I had a very fine trade in Navajo blankets. The Indians would come from long distances with their blankets and camp overnight at the store. We had a hogan near the store where they camped, and I furnished wood, flour, and coffee. The blanket trade meant I bought the blankets for cash. The United States government compelled traders to pay cash for blankets, wool, pelts, sheep, cattle, and horses. I did not have to pay out money in the pawn business. Some years I bought quite a lot of native corn and pinon pine nuts. Some years I bought cattle and horses, which made it necessary to keep quite a lot of money on hand during the spring, when the wool season was on, and in the summer when stock was bought. I had the home at Fruitland, New Mexico, a fine young team of driving horses, which Bill and Tom purchased from Joseph Tanner, and a solid 2-seated double rig or buggy capable of carrying 800 pounds or more. The horses, buggy, and harness were purchased for $300. We had a plan of staying at the store in summer, and Mary would take the kids to the home in the winter for school. This was a fine theory, but very poor medicine in practice. A man working hard does not like to cook for himself, so we only tried that one winter. After that, the only thing that caused a winter spent at the Fruitland home was an increase in the family. We had a teacher go out and stay with us at the trading post some years. We made the trip to the home from the store, and to the store from the home, many times with the team and rig taking the family. The business of working all day in the store and sleeping all night in the house did not leave me time to get fresh air. As I had been raised on a farm and had always worked outdoors, something had to be done. The consequence was I got 2 greyhound dogs and generally had a run every Sunday with the saddle horse and dogs after the big jackrabbits that are plentiful in that country. The government made us close the store on Sundays. On Sunday morning, I would saddle the horse, call the 2 hounds, and start out for a hunt. The dogs were as keen for the hunt as I was. How they would jump up by the horse and almost come up into the saddle. The dogs always kept close together while hunting, as they run only by sight and never track. I would ride out to some valley so the dogs could have fairly level ground to run on. They cannot reach top speed in rough ground or in high brush. The hounds would begin coursing up and down the country to find a rabbit. I would stop on some fairly high spot and watch. Suddenly, one dog would begin to run, and instantly the other dog joined in the chase. I would wait about 10 seconds to see which way the rabbit was pointed, and then the saddle horse, who was grain-fed and strong, would be urged to give all he had, and he had plenty. The dogs and the rabbit could outrun the horse, but the rabbit would always circle. Then the horse and I would cut across and gain on the chase. Sometimes we were some distance behind, and sometimes very close. I watched the hounds, not the rabbit. I could always tell which direction the rabbit was going and about how close the dogs were. Did you ever see a greyhound do his best in a race? Then you have seen one of the fastest animals in the world run. You would see the dog begin to strain as he got closer to his prey. The dog would get lower and closer to the ground. I could tell when he was in the final effort by how close he was to the ground and the longer leaps. The dog was about to make his great effort to seize the rabbit. I watched the hound and knew it all. You can believe about that time the quirt was also working, and the horse was doing his best with never a sound out of dog, horse, or man, just the greatest effort of all for speed. If the hound was successful, he gave just one snap, and the rabbit was killed. The dog would go several yards before he could stop. He would drop the rabbit and, gasping for air, walk around with his tongue out 6 inches before he could get quiet, and his great muscles to stop twitching. We would all rest for some time, then another run, and then home to the store. In these hunts, if the rabbit got into very rough ground or big brush, he would get away. But if he started out on the level country, he was lost. The Rabbit Hunt, 1905. In the spring, the Navajos have rabbit hunts. The big jackrabbit is quite a help in the food he furnishes, and for the fun of the chase. Some Navajo village decides to have a hunt. A date is set, and a suitable valley is selected that has a watercourse in the center from the big storms in the summer, big brush on the sides of the wash, and slopes up on either side with higher ground and smaller brush. From 12 to 30 riders will appear, each riding his best horse. All the equipment a rider has is a bridle, quirt, and 16 a club to throw. He has no saddles, and sometimes the rider has on only a pair of pants. The riders line up 200 yards apart on the opposite ridges to the valley, and some old men ride through the big brush in the bottom of the valley and act as busters to start the rabbits, which are backed under some brush and out of sight. If the rider comes too close, the rabbit starts out and heads up the side of the valley. The rider begins to run his horse, and the chase is on. As the rabbit comes up the side, the best riders on top with the fast horses get excited. Suddenly, one of them brings down his quirt, and the horse begins to run. The rider has seen the rabbit. The man and horse soon go out of sight over the ridge, but not for long. The rabbit is going to turn soon and come back to where he started from. That certain bush washes home. Suddenly, another rider begins to run. He sees the rabbit. This may be close to where the first rider started over the ridge, or maybe some distance down the line of riders. The second rider is working his quirt hard, and the pony is doing his best. So is the rabbit. The first rider has stopped where the second rider started. By this time, the excitement is general. No one knows which way the rabbit will go. All the riders watch for a running horse and rider, and the horses get as excited as the men. If a pony sees a horse coming up to him, he gets excited, rears, and sometimes bucks. The horse has been through this before. He knows in a few seconds the quirt will fall, and he will be pointed after that rabbit at full speed. He is just as keen to run as the rider is. The rabbit may cross this valley 2 or 3 times, but always he is in front of a fresh horse at top speed. Suddenly, the rabbit heads for the bigger brush and trees to hide in. One of the riders, if lucky enough to be close, sees what has happened and knocks the rabbit over with his short club. This happens again and again until the horses run down. Sometimes there is a big spill, and some pony falls. Sometimes the rabbit gets away, but his chances are only about 10%. The excitement is general, and the horses are keen to get into it. Some riders are unlucky and never see the rabbit, but he watches the running horse and knows what is happening. And when the running horse points his way, he comes alive. Sometimes the running horses start other rabbits, and the hunt then is really good. I have seen 3 or 4 rabbits being run at the same time. When the horses have had enough and the hunt is called off, the riders generally come together, put their saddles on the horses, and head for the nearest trading post. They may have 10 to 30 rabbits. The riders' squaws have likely already gone to the trading post and have been given coffee and flour. So, when the riders arrive, there is a general feast. At these meetings, the whole hunt is described, and the squaws and children have a good time laughing, especially if some rider has been thrown off his horse. The Navajo is good-natured when times are good and food plentiful. He loves a joke, especially if it is on the trader. In good years, when there is rain, he raises corn and melons, and his sheep and horses are fat. He has man dances and horse races and ceremonial dances such as the Yabichi, which lasts 3 days and always means a big gathering. Some years this semi-desert country is really a desert. There is no rain, no corn, no fat sheep. Then he is gloomy and will sometimes stand around in the store and never say a word for an hour. All of us in living our lives have had times when we think life has turned against us personally. Twice this has happened to me. The first time was the death of my mother in 1891, and the second time was the death of my oldest boy, Frank Leland Noel, Jr. He passed away in 1906 of typhoid fever and was buried in the cemetery at Fruitland on Thanksgiving Day. Instead of being a day of Thanksgiving for us, it was the saddest day of our married life, and to me, the second catastrophe of my life. His illness and death 17 were sudden. There was no other case of typhoid in all that country, and it was particularly bad in his case, as good doctors were no in the county. In fact, we were 30 miles from any doctor and 60 miles from any real conveniences, with only the team and buggy to go that 60 miles. The first death that struck me down and caused me to waste years of my life in an aimless existence was repeated over again as far as my belief in mercy and an answer to prayer was concerned. This time, I had responsibilities that had to be met before and after that Thanksgiving Day. What saved me the first time death laid a black hand on me was the memory of my mother, what she had taught me, and the belief that some way she would know what I did. The second time death again struck, I lost all my hope in prayer, and the word mercy is a mockery and a false delusion. Perhaps we will get justice for what we do, but mercy is past our way of understanding. What saved me in the second great crisis of my life was my wife and family. She was the strong character who never wavered, that still kept her faith, and in the end saved me and led the family along a Christian life. But for her comfort and happiness in our family, the present would certainly have been impossible. A man at such times loses all his faith in a belief that our lives are all directed. He is a changed man. He loses all direction in which way to turn and what to believe next. Time and work are his only comforts. Time does not cure any heartache, but in a long time we learn to live with what we have and to do without some of our dearest desires and hopes in life. The word why is unanswered and always will be. Time forces us not to forget but to live without what we sometimes most desire, and we get used to and accept what we have. In my case, I have been blessed beyond my greatest dream for a family. I am proud and satisfied with all they have done, their standing in life, and their successes. So, time buries the deep scars that life brings to all of us. Indian troubles. About this time, I developed eye trouble and had a regular case of trachoma of the eyes, a bad eye disease. Some Sundays, I would leave the store early, ride 30 miles to Shiprock, and have my eyes painted on the lids with a blue vitriol pencil. Then, I would have to sit all day with my eyes covered with a wet cloth, and when the sun went down, I would ride back to the store, making 60 miles in one day, as I had to be ready to run the store Monday morning. We spent several years with the children going to school while I was running the store. Sometimes Mary and the children were at the store with me, and sometimes Mary and the children were in the home at Fruitland. This continued up to about 1912 to 1913, at which time a serious trouble took place between the United States government and the Navajo tribe over the Indian custom of older men marrying young women and having more than one wife, up to 3 or 4. The government, in educating the Indians' children, taught that America had a law saying only on a wife. The superintendent at Shiprock, William T. Shelton, unwisely thought that here was a chance to make his reputation and show the whole reservation how to enforce the government regulations of only one wife. Now the Indians had been living on their code that a man could have more wives than one if he could pay for them. Some of them had 2 or 3 wives when the regulation was issued by the government. The plan was to give the Indians time to obey the order by keeping one of their wives and 18 leaving the others. This was not a hardship on the families, as some of the medicine men were idle and shiftless. The women were the real workers. In our section, there were 6 or 7 villages of Indians containing 10 to 20 families. Each village had a chief or head man. In one of these camps was a medicine man, Hot Tally Yazzie, little singing man, who had 3 wives and refused to make any change. Superintendent Shelton sent Navajo policemen out, had one of the wives brought in, and had her placed in the school to work. Hot Tally Yazzie watched his time, and when Superintendent Shelton and some of his policemen were gone to a court case at Aztec, the county seat, he got his gang together, went to the school at Shiprock, defied the one policeman there, and took his wife back to her home. He left word that he would not give her up to any policeman, and not to send out any to his camp. Superintendent Shelton immediately asked for soldiers, and after a month or 2, the soldiers came by way of Gallup, New Mexico. General Scott and the soldiers camped within 20 miles of my store, which was run by Charles Nelson. General Scott and his son and 2 soldiers came over to my store, Sano's Tea, and sent word to the Hot Tally Yazzie bunch to come in for a conference. This lasted 3 days. Before the soldiers came, Superintendent Shelton has sent a man by the name of Joe Tanner, an Indian language interpreter, out to several stores and advised the traders to close up and come in until the trouble was over. Several of them did, but I refused to move. I was friendly with Hot Tally Yazzie and all his bunch. They all traded with me and were my friends. Joseph Tanner and I made a trip to the Indian camp. Then he returned to Shiprock to report to Shelton and never returned. Shelton never came to the Sano's Tea conference while General Scott was there. The people working in the sawmill were all Navajos, except Mr. and Mrs. James Ayres, who with their son Willard lived at the sawmill and operated it for the government. During the trouble, they came down to Sano's Tea and remained there until the Indians had been taken away. Trader Walker closed his store and took his family into Shiprock. Gee Dodge, the head chief of the Navajo tribe, had been notified by the War Department to meet General Scott at the store. They held a council and asked the bunch of Indians they wanted to come in and counsel with General Scott. They accepted, and for 3 days the general met with them for 1 hour each day at 3 p.m. The diplomacy used by General Hugh L. Scott. "Let the Indians make this decision," General Scott said to F.L. Noel, and then went on to explain that he would take the time to understand the Indians' reasons for their actions and give the Indians time to realize the necessity of avoiding war for their own good. General Scott asked that the Indians be given food and allowed to eat and talk in the hogan, supplied by the trading post for visiting Indians, before they came into the council. The first day, General Scott simply greeted the chief Bezo-Chi and told him they had come to have a conference, and that he wanted him to go home and talk with his people and decide just what they wanted to say to him the 19th next day. But that he and the soldier had come a long way to help make peace between the Indians and the government. The second day came, and Bezo-Chi did bring his people down for tin conference. Again they were fed, and then all sat down to discuss the trouble. At first, General Scott let the Indians explain how they felt, and tell of their grievances against the treatment they had received. The general would talk to them, and they were allowed a few minutes to state their case. Then General Scott explained how all laws made in the land must be kept by white and Indian peoples alike, and that the soldiers were sent out to enforce these laws in all America. He told of the destruction and death and sadness that would result if the Indians made the government use the soldiers to go up to the mountain and bring down the men who had broken the laws. The general told then he was there to enforce the law, but would consider a settlement of the case if the ringleaders of the trouble would surrender to him, go out to Gallup, and have a trial at court. He promised them the same soldiers to protect and guard them if anyone should try to molest them. He explained how the Indians could cone and serve the term necessary for having broken the law, and then return safely and live in peace up there in the camp on the mountain with their wives and children. Then he sent them home to talk again, and told them to come down the next day to tell him whether to bring the soldiers over to make war or the wagon to take them away peacefully. It was fully understood that the young men would surrender. The morning of the third day found some 18 or 20 Indians standing around the enclosure, known as the bullpen, in the trading post, with General Scott, dressed in full uniform, sitting in a large rocker facing them, his back to the high counter that ran around the room. Lieutenant Scott and the interpreter were on one side of him, and F.L. Noel on the other, all unarmed. However, Lieutenant Scott did have his revolver within reach with which to protect his father should the Indians become excited and get unmanageable, for the tension was high, and they could see the Indians did not all feel the same. Over 100 Indians were squatting or standing in groups around the yard outside the building, while Mrs. Noel had the children and other white people staying quietly in the living room of the trading post. General Scott greeted the chief, and then asked them to say what they wanted to do. Guy Dodge was well educated, and he persuaded the bunch to surrender and stand trial. The young men one by one surrendered and asked for peace. Now it was Bezo-Chi's turn, and the old, wrinkled, gray-haired warrior stepped before the general, and with his body shaking with emotion declared that for him he would never surrender, that he was not now, nor never had been afraid of the white soldiers. But he wasn't a young Nan. This wasn't his fight. He and his wife were together. They were not having trouble, and if the young men of his tribe wanted to surrender, then he would go with them. "But I am not afraid of you," he declared with a sincerity that left no room for doubt in the white general's mind. The next day, the Indians were all taken to Gallup. It was just a month or two after Bezo-Chi and his boys returned from the Gallup jail that General Scott came again to the Navajo reservation to have some documents signed by Bezo-Chi. The contents of these papers I did not know, or if I did at the time I have forgotten, but I do remember how General Scott met Bezo-Chi as a friend, and with the help of an Arapaho interpreter talked and visited with him for several hours, part of the time no words being spoken, for all three were using the universal sign language of the Indians. Bazochi told of the tribe's origin, of their medicine men's power, the great thunderbird of death, and other tribal beliefs. To all of this, General Scott paid strict attention, and when the visit was over and the papers signed, they parted as friends and brothers. 20. There was quite a little excitement over this affair. The Shiprock office had warned people not to cross the reservation, and gave the impression there might be a small war before the general could get the Indians settled. Superintendent Shelton had been badly advised by Joe Tanner, who was a contractor and wanted the trouble to grow and bring in more soldiers. There was war talk at Shiprock Agency, but none at my store, where the Indians surrendered. General Scott ignored Superintendent Shelton in the matter, and Shelton blamed me for not moving out. My not moving had the effect of showing the report of the Shiprock Agency as greatly exaggerated, of not being founded on fact, and of belittling the whole program. Shelton never forgave me, and finally he gave a man a license for a store within 3 miles of my place. This forced me to leave the reservation. However, before I left, Shelton was forced to resign as superintendent at Shiprock, and left the service under a cloud. Sometime in March 1915, my wife and I, Bert Dustin and his wife, and George Bloomfield and his wife took a trip to California. We landed in Los Angeles and stayed there some time. We had a swim in the ocean at Long Beach, went on sightseeing tours through the orange groves at Redlands, and saw the alligators and ostriches. We had a wonderful time at Los Angeles. Then we traveled the old Mission Road to San Diego, where there was a wonderful fair exhibit. Then up to San Francisco, where the big fair was. It was a wonderful fair that cannot be described. While in Los Angeles, we saw a driver, Barney Oldfield, win the big race in a Hupmobile automobile. Then we went out to the raisin center of the world at Fresno, where grapes grow not by the row, but by the mile. We then returned to Gallup, New Mexico. While in Gallup, a telegram came telling me my Uncle Frank H. Hambleton had died in Baltimore, and for me to be present at the reading of the will. So in 1915, I went to Baltimore, where I was born and lived for the first year of my life. I stayed in Baltimore a while, then went back to Fruitland, where I sold the old home I owned, and bought one up on the Farmington Road 1 mile from my first place. The children were getting older now, and we began to think about their school and the company they were in. The oldest girl was 15 years old. There should be no more store for the family. Besides, it was evident that there were more stores than could prosper in the section, so we sold the store and settled in Kirtland, just a mile from Fruitland. I was elected to the school board and helped start a school there near home. I gave the school board 1 acre of ground, and they built a good school on this land. Chapter 5. We moved to Vernal, Utah. Now, raising a big family is an expensive business, and besides, we wanted to be near better schools. We had letters from Frank Roberts, Mary's brother, describing Uintah County as a new and wonderful land of plenty, with good schools. In the spring of 1917, I sold the store and home in Kirtland. I went to Vernal in the fall of 1916 and became interested in the homes there, and we then moved to Vernal, Utah, and bought a 280-acre ranch 3 miles from the Vernal post office called the Cabell Place. When we moved to the home at Vernal, there were 11 children. The oldest girl, Clara, was 16 years old. The youngest was Frank, 10 weeks old. Now we ran a big ranch, had horses, cattle, then sheep for 14 years. Donald was born there in 1919, the 10th of November. Chad was born there in 1921, the 29th of July. We moved onto the Cabell Ranch on April 25th, and immediately three problems came up for solution at once: schools, churches, and community life. The older children went to the high school in Vernal, and the younger ones to a grade school in Ashley. So, at once, there must be two rigs to get all the children of school age to school. This continued for years. At one time, there were 9 children going to school each morning. This problem was with us all of our stay on the Cabell Ranch, about 13 years. There was practically only one church to go to Latter-day Saints. No other community church was open all of the time. We attended the Latter-day Saints Church in Ashley, as our home was in that ward. There was a good high school at Vernal, and several elementary schools in the surrounding areas. This was later changed. Some of the outlying grade schools were closed, and the children were taken to a big central elementary school in Vernal. The school program in Vernal was a good one. The Latter-day Saints Church was divided up into wards. Each ward had its own church. Although some of the wards met in schoolhouses, there was a tabernacle in Vernal which was used at all stake conferences by all the wards. We were in an outside district, and the roads were bad, sometimes almost impassable. Although we had a Buick car when we moved to Vernal, we soon gave it up and went to church and dances with rigs and horsepower. Vernal has no railroad, and at that time, 1917, there were no big truck lines. The procedure was big horse-drawn wagon freight lines from Watson, 60 miles away, Price 110 miles away, and Provo 140 miles away. We had a daily mail, but the roads outside of the city limits were only dirt graded, and some parts of the country no grade. We were in Ashley Ward both for school and church, and the church and school were 3 miles north of Vernal. This was later changed so that our home ranch was classed in the Vernal First Ward. This was done on account of the condition of the roads. That year, 1917, a small bridge over Ashley Creek on the road we traveled to Vernal washed out, and for the month of June we were almost isolated. We raised a big crop of hay and grain, bought more cattle, had a number of milk cows, chickens, and hogs, and had a big garden. These things are vitally necessary when you attempt to raise a big family, which at this time numbered 11 children. We had a splendid life on the ranch. We owned saddle horses, buggy teams, and heavy draft horses. I had to have a hired man for the first few years, but as the boys got bigger, we were able to do our own work. Even up to this time, when my own family is close enough to help, we do not ask for any help from the balance of the world. These were glorious times. The boys each had his own saddle horse, and I had mine. We ran cattle on Diamond Mountain and had a big pasture at home. Our table was set with 13 seats. You have no idea the amount of bread, milk, butter, meat, and vegetables it takes to feed a family of 11. As time went on, 2 more came, making a family of 13 children and 2 parents, so we had a table set with 15 seats. For years, this meant 45 meals every day, and when the boys and I were working in the hayfield and irrigating the alfalfa, the meals had to be substantial and regular. What time we would have! We were not able to go into the rich set in Vernal, but we had a world of friends among good people that were not rich, but, like us, thought the word that was king of the English language was friend, not money. All my life I have lived and practiced that philosophy, and the family was healthy and happy living it. Those were glorious days. We had a big Christmas tree at Christmas time, and 15 birthdays each year. Each meant some kind of celebration. We were lucky in having lots of relations near that sometimes spent Christmas and other celebrations with us at the ranch. The house was big. The ranch was big. And in those days, the storehouse had to be big. We raised everything we used to a large extent. Even our flour was from our own wheat, ground at the mill, and all vegetables and meat were raised on the ranch. In fact, we had a little kingdom of our own. And I repeat, those were glorious days. The greatest blessing Mary and I have is to remember and talk over those days and our pride in the family we raised. We got up early on the Noel Ranch from 1920 to 1923. In the wintertime, I fed the horses in the morning. The boys fed and milked the cows. Then we had breakfast, and then the start for school, which was 3 miles away. This had to be traveled by horse and buggy in lots of zero weather, and sometimes 10 below and lower. This getting off to school was no small affair. Mary and I would do what we could to see that no one was late, and for years there were 2 buggies and some saddle horses. 2 buggies were necessary because, by that time, one of the girls was teaching in a school south of us, and she had her buggy and horse to make the trip. I can see a picture now of Mary coming from the barn without the buggy, and I could tell by her walk that there was trouble. I would call, "Mary, I will have to help." I would meet her and hold up my hand and say, "Get your coat on, and I will help with the buggy." Some days everything went smooth, and some days there were rough spots. Now, these rough spots were blessings in disguise because the boys learned to work, to accept responsibility, and to depend on themselves, which is just as necessary as book learning, and helps meet the world and fight life's battles. Nothing is more necessary than having a boy or girl learn that he must accept his share of responsibility in life. During these years, some of the children graduated from the high school in Vernal, and we started a record of 13 children from one family graduating from the Vernal High School. This record belongs to the Noel family and has never yet been equaled in the Vernal School. And now, life began to change for us all. Clara and Jenny graduated first, then Reginald, then Mary and Bessie, then Floyd and Wright, then the others in later years. I can see Mary and Bessie winning a debate at Vernal against any ward team in the stake. I can see Clara and Jenny thinking they were young ladies and wanting certain shoes and dresses. I can see Reginald the best at mathematics in his school. I can see Floyd as a basketball and track man for his school. I can see Wright and Howard going to Roosevelt and other places as members of basketball and track teams for their school. I can see them as they do wrestling and boxing. I can see Frank, Donald, Virginia, and Dorothy all taking a high place in their school activities and graduating as their turns came. Chad, the last Noel to graduate, was school chief of police for a year, and also represented the school in the track meet at Salt Lake City. All along these years we were blessed with many friends, and people came to the ranch home and stopped with us. There was always enough for all. The Roy Cooper family were with us at Christmas time, and the Lewis D. Roberts family were with us one Christmas. We did not need the picture shows, the comic books, the television of today. We had our own amusements and were happy. Some of the greatest rook games of all time were played in that old home, and some great birthday parties were held there. Those were wonderful, joyous days, full of work and happiness. We really had a little kingdom of our own. Somewhere in those days we had Otis Weeks and Ronald Preece come down to the ranch, and they kept on coming. They were company for all the family. They were then, and have been ever since, a blessing and a comfort to all of us. Otis married Jenny, and after Clara had filled a mission, she married Ronald Preece. All these years in the summer there was work on the ranch with the crops, and on the mountain with the cattle. And in the winter there was more work feeding the cattle and school. Some years there were 100 tons of hay raised on the ranch plus barley and oats. Even the girls helped with the ranch work, such as driving the hay sleds and the mowers. The boys would have their turns pitching hay, one of them on one side of the sled and I on the other side. After they got bigger, this was changed, and there would be a boy on each side of the sled. How they would try to show who was the best man. Sometimes when we were stacking hay, the girls would take a freezer of ice cream out to the stack. At such times a recess was called, and everyone rested. Floyd and Wright were our best irrigators, and Reginald was good with the teams. In all the years on the ranch, Mary had hay fever and asthma, and some years it was serious with her. About June of each year, Mary had to go to the mountain for a month on account of hay fever. She would take some of the children with her, and some of the grandchildren in later years. I built a house on the mountain on my cattle range, and we took some of the saddle horses up there every year. The children, all 13, got to be good horseback riders. They had grand times riding on the mountain, going to see the calves and hilltops. The Cattle Association would round up all the cattle in September. Each owner would cut out what cattle he wanted to ship, put them into what was called the beef herd, and have them herded separately from the others until all the beef cattle were collected. Then this bunch was driven to Lewis Allen, a settlement on the bank of Green River. A few men went on with them, generally to Omaha, Nebraska. Sometimes the river was high, and the cattle had to be forced to swim across. Sometimes the job was rough. All the boys took their turns going to the mountain with me to see to the cattle, brand calves, and distribute salt. All the children learned to catch and saddle their riding horses and help herd stock. There were numerous accidents that happened on the Noel ranch. Reginald took Dolly and Brownie on the hay rack and said to Wright, "You go with us. We will haul the hay out of the field across Spring Creek. Ready? All aboard." So, as the rack moved up and down the field, the hay came onto the rack, Reginald on one side of the rack and Wright on the other. I was on the rack loading, but there was trouble. Dolly, the black mare, would reach down and grab a mouthful of hay. The man on the rack lost his temper, took the lines, and jerked the mare's head up. But he jerked too hard, and the bridle broke. The bridle and bit came off the mare's head. The mare looked up, and a first-class runaway was on. The man had the lines in his hands and had some control over the one horse, but nothing could stop the black horse. How she did run! The man held the brown mare back as much as possible, and they circled the field that way. When they came round in a circle to the place where they started, the man saw Reginald throw down his fork and begin to run as the brown mare came up beside him. He seized the bit in one hand, the hame of the harness in the other, and began to jerk and stop the brown mare. After 50 yards of this, the black mare gave up and stopped. What would have happened if Reg had missed the hame with his right hand is your guess. Following is a chart of meals prepared for 7 years. Children, parents, daily meals yearly. 11 children, 2 parents, 39 daily meals, 13,000 total meals in the year. 1920, 12 children, 2 parents, 42 daily meals, 12,000 total meals in the year. 1921, 13 children, 2 parents, 45 daily meals, 15,000 total meals in the year. 1923, 12 children, 2 parents, 42 daily meals, 14,000 total meals in the year. 1925, 11 children, 2 parents, 39 daily meals, 13,000 total meals in the year. 1926, 10 children, 2 parents, 42 daily meals, 13,000 total meals in the year. Sit down, take your time, and figure how many meals the Noel Ranch furnished the 13 years we were there. Not counting working hands and visitors. You get 200,000 meals. Is there any wonder that not all the children went to college? The wonder is that they all came through high school. A boy or girl who knows how to work and take the responsibilities of life and goes through high school has a splendid chance in life. Somewhere about this time, Clara Noel went on a mission for the Latter-day Saints Church. She went to Sacramento, California for 1.5 years. At the time Clara and Jenny went through the temple, Jenny was married to Otis Weeks, and Clara left for her mission. This was the first break in the Noel family life, but it was soon followed by some of the others leaving the old home. The carefree, happy days were over. Life began to have responsibilities for the children as well as the parents. Children grow into men and women, get married, leave home, and start their own families. In this case, there were 13 children, and one by one, they left the old home, took positions for themselves, got married, and began the wonderful job of there being 13 families instead of one family. Today, the 13 children mean 13 families. All 13 are living and married and well. And so our little kingdom began to disintegrate until the two parents were alone, and life's destiny had been fulfilled. Somewhere along these years, Mary and Reginald went to the Brigham Young University at Provo. They were there 1 year. Then Reginald went to the Utah State Agricultural College at Logan, and Mary went back another year to Brigham Young University. At this school, Mary met Roland Rigby, who visited us at the ranch at Vernal one summer. The next year, Mary married him, and one more of the 13 was gone to another home. Roland Rigby is a man of good character, well educated, and has been a school teacher and held high office in his Latter-day Saints Church. He is now a teacher in Brigham City, Utah. We are proud of him as a son-in-law. They have raised a fine family. Clara came back from her 1.5-year mission and helped on the ranch for a year. She was a good cook and took charge when Mary went to the mountain in June. She married Ronald Preece in 1925. She moved to Ashley Ward, and one more was missing from the 13. They have a fine family of 5 children, and we are proud of all of them. Ronald has been sheriff of Winter County. Now a serious problem came to me, as it does to all fathers. What about the boys? We did not have the money to send them through college. Some got 1 year, some 2, some no college course at all. Reginald came back from Logan and helped me on the ranch for a year. He was good with the cattle and sheep on the mountain. We had sold the cattle and bought some sheep. The bank that handled all our deals was interested in the deals on the side against me. In after years, I found out the bank was not my friend, but was interested in both sheep and cattle deals. Trusting this banker's advice was the chief cause of my losing the Noel Ranch. Now, Reginald had worked hard for the family and went with me when we sold the lambs in the fall. When I settled with the bank, there was no money to pay anyone. What was to be done? Should I ask Reginald to keep on working when I knew there was no money for him, or encourage him to find a job? At this time, real trouble started, and I realized we might lose the ranch. This was the deciding factor, and I encouraged Reginald to find a job of his own. He finally went to Nevada, worked on the state road survey, made a success of his life, and is now a civil engineer for Isbell Construction Company of Reno, Nevada. He deserves great credit. Reginald married a widow Bradshaw, who had 2 sons. He helped educate these boys and treated them as his own. The boys have married and are each raising a family. We are proud of all of them, and especially Laura, Reginald's wife. She deserves a share in the success he has made. One more of 13 gone. About this time, Bessie had been going to the University of Utah and succeeded in getting a certificate as a teacher. She has taught every year since. She married Noel Scroggins in 1945, and since then both of them have been able to get a Bachelor of Science degree. Noel is now trying for a master's degree. Bessie and Noel have no family, but have treated Mary and me as if we were their responsibility. We have accepted this and feel that, in a way, they are our source of comfort not only to us, but to any of the family who need them. Because they have no family, we have had more of their company and are very proud of both of them. So one more left the 13, and the ranch was beginning to get lonely. All the children have been more than kind and generous to us, and some of them have raised large families of their own and have had to work hard for them. Now we will have to go back to some of the children. Frank and Donald and Chad and Dorothy were going to school at Vernal, but before them we have Wright and Howard in high school and making quite a reputation as good athletes. Floyd had graduated and went on a 2-year mission for the Latter-day Saints Church. He was sent to the San Jose branch in California. When 1930 came along, we were in bad shape financially. The drought and depression started in 1927, and I had borrowed from our supposed-to-be friend, the banker, to buy sheep. I had finally sold them and paid him up, but no money was left. We lost our alfalfa seed crop and wheat crop that year because of a cloudburst in the hills above the ranch. The water came down and ran a foot deep over the big field when the wheat was in the shock, and also covered a fine crop of alfalfa seed. My loss was over $3,000 as we had sacrificed the hay crop and let the alfalfa go to seed. Livestock prices were at their lowest since the last panic, and hay was high because of the drought conditions. The next year was when we sold the sheep and ranch to Sam Herron, and I moved the family up to the Joe Rich home in Vernal. This place had 10 or 12 acres of farmland and quite a pasture belonging to it. So we took some of our horses and milk cows with us. Sam Herron was a hard-working man who had made his money on a ranch 12 miles from Vernal. Sam Herron and I were friends and got along fine for some time, but unfortunately he was also a friend of the same bank I dealt with, and in time we had trouble and were enemies. Our standing at that time was that I had lost all my money, and the banker who had bought my steers, lambs, and wool was through with me. Sam Herron bought my sheep and ranch through the bank where his money was deposited. The same banker made the deals. Herron only lasted a few years, and he also lost his money and died owning a small store at Fort Duchesne about 30 miles from Vernal. After losing the ranch and moving to the rich place, we worked at anything we could. We hauled coal. We had some equipment, weeders and seeders, which we used for bean crops that were being raised. At that time, the price dropped so drastically that the farmers couldn't pay us, and we lost the equipment. Howard helped Wright and Floyd on a ranch they rented, the Bullock Ranch, near Jensen, and raised hay and beans, and the others worked at odd jobs. The next year, Floyd and Wright worked for Haler Whitbeck in Colorado in the summer herding sheep and moving camp for him, and Wright came back in time to go to the agricultural college at Logan for school. Floyd had been called on a mission and came back to Brush Creek in 1951, and that year went on his mission. While we were at the rich place, the same banker, who had helped me go broke in every way possible, took our bunch of dairy stock and a few lambs, and this time got the last dollar we had. But it was his last chance. The last note was paid him. Wright and Howard moved us to Brush Creek, and then Wright went to Logan. At Brush Creek, we had leased a herd of sheep from the Humphrey Phosphate Company. Harry Ratliff was their agent. Howard and Wright worked with the sheep at Brush Creek from April until fall. Then Wright went to Logan, and Howard built a house in Vernal that winter and worked with his father-in-law, Gerald Hunting, as he had married his high school sweetheart, Elna Hunting. That fall, Ronald Preece took over the sheep when Wright went to Logan. Virginia was at Logan that year working her way through school and went on to get a Bachelor of Science degree. Bessie was teaching school in Vernal, and the last part of the winter, she had a place rented big enough to take care of Frank, Donald, Dorothy, and Chad. The next winter, Bessie taught again and kept them at the Cooper place. The next spring in the March, 1933, Wright had to quit Logan and come home to take care of the sheep. We had lost 50% in that desperate winter, when, my record shows, it snowed every day in February. Wright leased a lot more sheep that spring, put them with ours, and ran them on the mountain range that had been allotted to us. About this time, Floyd had been on his mission about a year or more, and returned that fall and helped us with the sheep. Floyd had not been back very long when he was appointed Fish and Game Warden for Uintah County. He still lived with us, but he was a busy man, as Uintah County is a big county. Late in the fall, we turned the whole lease of sheep and land back to the Humphrey Phosphate Company. In the settlement with the phosphate company, I turned everything I owned over to them, even some of the furniture and the milk cows, and washed my hands of the whole deal. Wright stayed on and worked for the company, and in a year went to Montana with them. Bessie and the children were in Vernal at a house belonging to Orson Calder. Mary and I moved down there when we settled with the phosphate company and left Brush Creek. All we had was our clothes and bedding. Harry Ratliff, the phosphate company agent, took everything else. I had been active in helping to get the vote for the Indians, and about a month before we left Brush Creek, I had been nominated by the County Democratic Convention for the office of County Clerk and Auditor. Life had indeed changed for me. The one-time rancher, cowman, and sheepman was now making speeches all over the county and running for political office. Mr. Hiram Calder would introduce me as a man of few words, and I would address the audience for about 5 minutes, knowing they were sick of receiving warrants that were discounted by the loan agencies, and knowing something of the resources of Uintah County. I would promise to do my utmost to bring solvency and progression to the county. November 7th, I was elected, and was re-elected in 2 elections later. I served as county clerk 12 years. Now the bitter struggle was over. No more financial failures, no more physical work and back-breaking jobs with no payday. For 12 years I was to get a check every month, and life was on a different plane altogether, with all the children, when not in school, looking for work and getting their own money. Bessie was teaching in Uintah County. Floyd was game warden, but stayed with us. Wright was in Montana. Howard was working here and there, and soon went to Klamath Falls, Oregon. Virginia had a teacher's certificate and was teaching in Uintah County. Frank, Dorothy, Donald, and Chad were going to high school in Vernal and stayed with us at the Orson Calder home, part of which we had rented. Frank soon graduated and went to work for Haler Whitbeck and others. Dorothy married DeMar Gale in 1956 and moved away. Donald graduated and found a job. Chad, the youngest, soon graduated and went to work. The family of 13 children was separated and at work. Now a word of appreciation of what the children did for the family in all those hard-working years. Never were a father and mother blessed with children that were as willing to work as all the family from the oldest to the youngest. Each did his share. I want to thank each and every one of them for the kind, respectful manner they have always shown us, for the love they show for us and for each other, and for the way they hang together and are still a big family. In the years when 13 children and 2 parents were on the ranch, there was a lot of work to do. 45 meals a day. Think of what wash day meant. Think of the 600 quarts of food put up. Think of 800 pounds of sugar each year. Think of the meat, pork, and beef, each fall, and a mutton, any and all chances to get one home from the herd. Think of the flour we had to have for a year's supply. Above all, think of the love and kindness for their parents and for each other. The old ranch would have closed long before, except for the splendid work of that wonderful family of boys and girls. And now, in a few years' time, the family changed at a fast pace. Frank married Helen Stringham and went to California for a while. Floyd married Dorothy Clark in Utah, and on the same day Wright married Marjorie Dion in Montana. Dorothy Noel had gone to Oregon, where Howard and Elna were living, but came back in a year and married Damar Gale. Chad and Damar were working in the Park City gold mines about this time. Donald was called on a mission to the Northwest for Thai Latter-day Saints Church. Before Donald returned, Chad was called to go on a mission. Chad asked for time to have money to go with, and worked in the mines some time longer, but left for his mission to California in the summer. Donald enlisted in the Coast Guard and was stationed at Astoria, Oregon. His wife, Elizabeth Walker, soon went up and joined him. Chad came home after 2 years on his mission and married Lois Caldwell. They went to California for a while, and he enlisted on the 8th of September, 1943, in the Army Engineer Corps, and served in both Europe and Japan before his 3 years were over. Ha returned to America just as peace came. He went to Klamath Falls, Oregon, soon after. As to the 4 missions for the Latter-day Saints Church filled by Clara, Floyd, Donald, and Chad, each child worked hard to make money for his mission. The ability of each to help pay his own expenses was all that made the missions possible. Also, we want to thank all the people and organizations who so generously helped those 4 missionaries when on their missions. At this time, what was the status of the 2 parents of the Noel family? On January 7th, Frank L. Noel took office as Uinta County Clerk and Auditor for a first term. He was living then at the Orson Calder home in Vernal. His wife and 4 children were with him, and a new life started for the parents. They had come through the last years before this time in poor shape. They were a wreck financially, and the mother was in very bad shape physically. She had been suffering from hay fever and asthma. For 3 years, rheumatism also had hurt her health. In fact, she was overworked and needed rest and care. The last few years had been hard on these 2. The worry and tension was great as they gradually lost the home and all they had. The father was shaken in his hope in life and in the justice of life being equal to all. Not so the mother. Never did her faith fail or her ability to get help and comfort from her prayers, and so she was the strong one who saved the father and the family. I remember on one occasion when the father saw for certain he was going to lose the home and could not send all the kids to college, he was gloom and depressed, perhaps cranky, and about hopeless. The mother stopped him one day in the yard, and after some talk learned what was the cause of his trouble. The mother said they had been married for not only good in life, but also for what was bad. She said she was willing to face whatever came day by day so long as they were together. She proposed that they forget about financial troubles and live for each other and the family. They shook hands on that agreement, and the father was comforted and has lived up to that agreement. It was that which caused life to be more happy for all. The man was saved as far as his belief in the justice of things was concerned. The mother's faith never wavered, and the father and family know now that was their greatest blessing. We stayed at the Calder home in Vernal for 3 or 4 years, And then, in 1938, I bought a small home in Vernal, a 5-room house, and 1/2 acre of land. This gave us room for a good garden, and some flowers and lawn. A year after this, Virginia married Belden Reynolds, and they went to California, lived there for about 3 years, then came back to Vernal and bought a home there. They were only there a year when Belden was drafted into the Army and spent some time in the Gulf of Mexico area. He returned to Vernal when his time was served. Belden Reynolds was lucky when his name was entered in a veteran's drawing for homes at Cody, Wyoming. He won a fine ranch with water rights, moved onto the property, and is there now raising a fine family. We lived at Vernal for several years, improved our home, and the children would come and see us there. Some years we saw most of the family, and some years only a few. All the children were married and raising their own families. The work in the clerk's office was pleasant. I made many friends and some enemies while I worked there. Perhaps my best service to the county was getting the debts paid and getting the county on a pay-as-you-go basis. This was done with the help of the treasurer, assessor, and county commissioners. We borrowed the money to retire our bonds as they became due, thus making our warrants negotiable and putting us on a cash basis. There was much legal work, and the clerk saw all of what happens and was partly responsible for keeping everything up to date. The county commissioners are the real bosses of any county, and theirs is the responsibility of good government and good roads, but not schools. A separate school board was elected by the people and ran the schools. At elections, sometimes there was quite a little excitement. It was always a question of keeping the liquor and rough gambling element from getting control of the county offices. It was the custom for the county officers of each of Utah's 29 counties to meet in convention once a year in Salt Lake City, a sort of up-to-date school for them. These conventions came off in January of each year and lasted 3 days. There was always a banquet the night of the 3rd day at which the county officials had the custom of taking their wives and 1 or 2 friends. Over 500 people were in attendance as a rule, with speakers and a floor show. This was a state affair. Also, there was a national meeting or convention of the 3,000 counties of all the states. This was held at some city in the United States, selected by a vote by the National Convention of the year before. Mary and I attended one in L9L Vertical Bar .6 at Cincinnati, Ohio, in June. The county commissioners of Winter County asked 3 of the county officers to go that year and gave each $175 expense money. Roy Labrum, commissioner, Frank L. Noel, clerk, and Lester Bingham, assessor, went and took their wives. At that time, Otis Weeks and Jenny were living in Vernal. Otis was doing well as a stock buyer of sheep, cattle, and horses. He and Jenny decided to make a trip with us, and we went in the Weeks car. This was the best trip of our lives. The first night we reached Denver, Colorado. The second night, someplace in Kansas. In Kansas, we saw the Capitol building at Topeka and the great wheat fields. Some places there were no hills and very few trees, but as far as you could see, a level, flat country, and every inch of it seemed to be in wheat. We marveled at the immense acreage in wheat, and how in the world they harvested so much, but soon we came to where the giant combines were working, and marveled no more. Those giant machines cut, thrased, and sacked 20 bushels of wheat every round, and they were faster than horses. Yes, Kansas was a wonder to us. Some sections were harvesting wheat, some sections were plowing and sowing wheat, as they have the wheat for winter pasturage for stock. Some sections were summer plowing, and the land was not used until the next year. In one section there were the oil wells. There was a giant business going on, but no one in sight. Just pump after pump raising the oil, and all connected with a pipeline that ran through the country. We saw more wheat than corn, but later in Ohio and other states we saw immense fields of corn with the plow furrows a mile long and the fields 1 mile square. We were used to mountain country where a little crop was raised in a small valley, and suddenly we were in the grain center of the world. In time we came to Kansas City on the Missouri, and on to St. Louis on the Mississippi. In 3 days, we had come over the 11,000-foot mountain pass near Denver and crossed the Mississippi River, the largest river in America, and on to Cincinnati, Ohio, where at the hotel the room Labram had was number 2607. In all the states we crossed where we saw the Capitol buildings. They were the finest and largest of all the buildings. Also, the state universities were grand, and the high schools and universities in all the cities were about the best buildings, best-kept grounds, and showed that the first thought was school and churches. About the 4th day we reached Cincinnati, and at the hotel at supper we saw a floor show that was wonderful. Here we met in session with delegates from all the states and spent 3 days at meetings and classes. There were trips to make and sights to see. One was a trip on a steamboat on the Ohio River to a famous racetrack and exhibit. From there we went on to Washington, D.C., and saw some wonderful sights: the Capitol and all the big buildings and monuments, George Washington Monument, Abraham Lincoln, Thomas Jefferson, and unknown soldier monuments. We saw the Senate in session, the Congress Room, and all the other great buildings. We went through the Treasury Building and saw Uncle Sam make money, and how he guarded it. In the great Library Building, we saw the Constitution of the United States and the great names signed there. And while I looked at that great document, there was a soldier with his rifle looking at me. We went through the Smithsonian Museum and saw the airplane, the Spirit of St. Louis, in which Lindbergh crossed the Atlantic. We went out to the airport, perhaps the busiest in the world, and watched the big planes come and go. We went through Arlington Cemetery and on to the home of Robert E. Lee at Arlington. Then we went to the great shrine of all Americans, Mount Vernon, and I sat in the same rocking chair that was used by George Washington and looked out on the same Potomac River that he loved. I was thrilled to go through Mount Vernon. We saw the library, the big bed, which Washington used, and the old-style kitchen and buildings for the workers. The day we were there, 10,000 tourists went through, and all through the warm weather they go through by the thousands. I was thrilled to see the home life of our greatest American, for George Washington has always been that to me, and one of the great men of all time and all countries. If you are raising a family of young boys and girls, and especially if they are approaching manhood and womanhood, it would do you and them good to go from your home anywhere in the United States across country in your own car. Give them a chance to see that in every town or city you pass through, the finest buildings are the state capitals, the great universities, and the splendid churches. And always in county, city, and state, there are the schools, which are for their benefit, and their children's benefit, and the nation's good. Then take them on to Washington, D.C., that wonderful city where the Charter of Human Rights, the famous Constitution of the United States, is kept. Let them see their democratic government at work, and show them that their individual vote is just as important as the vote of any man who walks American soil. Then take them to Mount Vernon and show them the life in America at the time our free government started, and make them realize their responsibility. I have been from Washington, D.C. west to San Francisco, and from the Pecos River in Texas to the Columbia River in Oregon and Washington State. And in every state, the finest buildings are the capitals, churches, schools, and hospitals, and the great scientific centers. Lincoln's great statement is true. A government of the people. If you make this trip, you will find America is run by the people, and no man has any more than a small following. Any small part of voters that oppose our free government have crept in mostly from foreign lands and by crooked means. Never lose your faith in the integrity of the common people of America. One of the great privileges of the world is to be an American citizen. If you make this trip, you and your children will have your belief in American life renewed, and your pride in being an American rekindled. America is the finest land in all the world. We went from Washington to Baltimore, Maryland, where my mother was raised, and to the cemetery where father, mother, and sister Bessie are buried. We own Lot 212 Northwest Section in Greenmount Cemetery, Baltimore, Maryland, and have a certificate of perpetual care for 1/2 the lot where the graves are. I was born in Baltimore and lived there the first 6 months of my life. Then my parents moved to my father's old home at Plainfield, Essex County, Virginia, where I lived until I was 17 years old. Then my mother's health failed, and we left the old home. From Baltimore, we drove down to Coles Point, where Evelyn Godman lived. We met her husband and his mother, besides Evelyn, whom we had never seen. She was a Noel, and had been corresponding with Jenny Weeks, my daughter, as both of them were interested in the Noel genealogy. She was very hospitable and entertained us at dinner, gave us a ride in Chesapeake Bay, which we enjoyed very much. Jenny Weeks and Evelyn Godman are still working on genealogy. From there we drove to Tappahannock on the Rappahannock River. Plainfield, the Noel home when I was young, is only 6 miles from Tappahannock, and I drove the 6 miles 5 days a week going to school there. We stayed there 2 or 3 days and visited the old home at Plainfield, which I was sorry to see in such a dilapidated condition. I had not seen the home since it was sold to the Andrews family in 1889, 55 years. The boys of the Andrew family had gone to the army, and their parents were sick and bedfast at that time. The buildings were in need of repair. The whole country had changed. There was a bridge across the Rappahannock River. No more horse and buggy travel. No more steamboats on the river. No more sand and muddy roads. The river had long ceased to be the artery of commerce, and the little town was only a quiet village as the big trucks rumbled by, crossed the bridge, and were in Baltimore in a few hours, where the steamboat had taken 2 days, and the life of the people had changed. There was no more time to visit and stay overnight at the big farm. Most of the owners had moved into some town, and the cars flashed by on the good roads. I was lost, and saw no resemblance to the country I had known 55 years ago. I was a stranger in a strange land, and was glad to get away. While in Tappahannock, I met 2 men I had gone to school with 55 years before, George Dangerfield and Alan Latane, and 2 women, Alice and Mary Brooke Mallory, sisters. They went to the same Sunday school in Tappahannock that I did 55 years ago. In the square before the country house in Tappahannock was a statue of bronze with the names of a certain regiment of soldiers that fought in the Civil War. They were from Essex County, Virginia, and my father's name, Henry R. Noel, was on that statue. The statue had been installed several years before by the few remaining relatives of the Regiment 52 Virginia Cavalry. At the ceremonies when the statue was unveiled, the governor of Mississippi, my first cousin, Edmund F. Noel, made the principal address giving the statue to Essex County. From Tappahannock, we drove to Richmond, Virginia, saw the Capitol and the university, then went on to Roanoke and then into Tennessee. We saw Nashville, the capital, and then went on to Memphis, where we crossed the Mississippi River, and saw the great rice fields and irrigation works on the Arkansas, the largest rice growing spot in the United States. From Little Rock, Arkansas, we went on to Tulsa, Oklahoma, through Denver, and back over the 11,000-foot pass to Vernal, Utah. The wonderful trip was over, but memory of what we saw will always be with us. Much of the comfort and pleasure on the trip was due to Jenny and Otis Weeks, in whose car and with whom we traveled. About 10 days after returning to Winter County, the first primary election was held, and in August, a second runoff election, and November 7th, the regular county election was held. Owing to a deafness that I was developing, I was not a candidate that year. I was a busy man that fall. I turned over the clerk's office in January 7, 1947, to the newly elected clerk, Mr. Charles Pope. I shall always feel grateful to the people of Uintah County for electing me 3 times to the office of clerk. In Vernal and in the county I had many friends. Our Draper home. We might have been there longer, but age was catching up with me. I was getting partly deaf and not in a fit condition to fill any office. Also, my wife's health had not been good during the last 5 years in Vernal. She had asthma and hay fever, and the asthma was getting worse. The altitude at Vernal is 5,280 feet, and our doctor advised a lower climate. In January 1947, we sold the home at Vernal to Reed Ross, and bought a home in Draper, Utah, where the snow does not get so deep and zero weather is unusual. We moved into the home in Draper on February 15, 1947. We soon made some fine friends in Draper and appreciated the courtesy and kindness that the people of Draper First Ward have shown us. Draper is 15 miles south of Salt Lake, and members of the family and many old friends from Uintah County stopped at our home in a year's time. On October 5, 1948, I had been married 50 years, and they were gloriously happy years. The family decided to have a golden wedding celebration at Draper. My wife's health was better. The home was a happy location, and so on October 5, 1948, we were honored by most of the family being there and a large number of friends attending from several states. Some from New Mexico, some from Oregon, some from California, and a large number from Utah. We secured the amusement park at Draper for the day, moved up to the park at 9 a.m., had a ball game in the morning, a big picnic dinner at noon. About 2 p.m. a meeting was called to order by Frank Leland Noel, who at that time was president of the Noel Genealogical Society. Mary and I both were presented with winter coats by the society and also received many lovely gifts from friends. It was a big day for Mary and myself, for family, friends, and neighbors did their best to honor us, and many kind words were said that live in our memory. Mary is like I am. The handshake of a friend means something more than money can. October 4th, a family meeting was held, and the Noel Genealogical Society elected new officers, and a program of holding a family reunion once a year. About October 6th, Bessie and several of the family took Mary and me to Vernal, and we held open house at the Otis Weeks' home on the Golden Wedding program, and saw many of our old friends at Vernal. In November of 1948, Clara Preece, our oldest girl, called us and said if we wanted to go with them to be ready the next day, as Ronald Preece was taking Clara Preece and Jenny Weeks down to Fruitland, New Mexico, where the 2 girls were born. Mary and I were ready, and were off on one of the finest trips we ever made. Mary and I were married in Jackson, near Fruitland, in 1898, and lived for years in Fruitland. Most of the children were born there, and Clara and Jenny went to school there. We left Draper about 9 a.m., went to Price, Utah, had dinner with Mary's sister, Daphne Hartle, then drove on to Cortez, Colorado, and put up for the night. The next day we drove up to the Mesa Verde National Park, saw the cliff ruins, and went on to Mancos, Colorado. Mancos is where Mary went to school for several years. We saw the old Roberts home, then went on to Durango, Colorado, and down the Animos River to Farmington, then on to Fruitland, where my brother, Hambleton B. Noel, lived. His wife was postmistress there. The next morning, Mary and I spent part of the day in Farmington, New Mexico, at the home of Sadie Dustin, an old schoolmate of Mary's. There we met many friends we had not seen for 30 years. William Evans, Tom Dustin, Roy Burnham, and many others. We returned to H.B. Noel's place at Fruitland that night. On that day, Ronald Prio, Clara Preece, and Jenny Weeks drove down to Fruitland with Joy Noel, my nephew, H.B. Noel's son. Clara and Jenny saw the old school they attended years before, and the house where Clara was born. They took pictures of a footbridge on the San Juan River, also of the old Burnham home, which I owned for years, and where several of the family were born. That night we were all at the home of H.B. Noel. The next morning we left Fruitland, drove to Shiprock, and started south on the Navajo Reservation. On the road to Gallup, 79 miles from Shiprock, was the old trading post I had owned and run for 10 years, the name Sa Nos Ti. We stopped there, but were disappointed in what we found. The old store had burned down, and the buildings we found were new to us. The store was closed, and only opened when the owner came from Fruitland at noon. The whole country had changed. The good roads, the fast, big trucks, even the life of the Indiana was different. There was too much gimme from the United States government. This had been developed by smart traders and was good for the trader, but had a bad effect on the Indian. The tribe of Navajos had changed from an independent, hard-working, stock-owning people to a status of depending on the government. There were not many blankets anymore, not much stock raised, not much farming. The word gimme was their chief concern. I was disappointed, and we hurried on past Window Rock, the principal government agency at present. We saw several church missions and met a nephew, a son of H.B. Noel, named Edmund Noel, who was clerking at an Indian store. This man had a fine young family and is now located in Farmington, New Mexico, where there are good schools. One or two Hopi Indian villages where the famous snake dances are held we saw. We went on to Keams Canyon, where the store was run by Clifford Meggie, the husband of Betty Noel Meggie, daughter of H.B. Noel, my niece. We stayed at Keams Canyon that night and drove the next day to the Grand Canyon, one of the great sights of all the world. The next day we went on to the Boulder Dam. Here we stayed for hours and went from the top of the dam down the 500-foot elevator to the bottom of the dam, saw the 30-foot steel pipes that controlled the river flow, saw the big generators where the electric current for part of the California county comes from, saw a wonderful dam, one of the giant engineering feats of the world. It is unbelievable until you see it, and then you are at a loss how to describe it. It was a thrilling experience. That night we reached Cedar City and stayed with our son, Floyd C. Noel, who is forest ranger there. The next day we arrived home at Draper, and one of the most pleasant trips we ever took was over. Mary and I still talk of that trip and are very grateful to Ronald and Clara Preece and Jenny Weeks, who made it possible. Mary and I lived these years quietly in Draper. We saw and entertained many of our own family, and saw and entertained many old friends, some of whom we had not seen for years. We started raising rabbits, but lost money on them and tried chickens. We were helped in the chicken business financially by Lou Roberts, Mary's brother, and by advice from our friend of old times, even back to the days at Fruitland, New Mexico, Jim Washburn and Sally Meagee, whom we knew before they were married. We were surprised to meet them again in Draper, where they have a home, have prospered, and raised a large family. They are still our good friends. Jim hints that I still tell people I played ball with him 100 years ago, which is a little exaggerated by about 40 years, about 1950. Nola May, Jenny's daughter, took us, Mary and myself, on a trip to Fruitland, New Mexico. We had a wonderful visit with Hambleton and Eva Noel, my brother and his wife, and many old friends back to days before we were married. And we saw our boy's grave, Frank Leland Noel, in the Fruitland Cemetery. We stayed with Hambleton and Eva for several days. They held a reception for us at which we met many friends we had not seen for years. When you are 25 years old, have just married the finest girl in the world, and have started a home that eventually will mean 14 children, you should be happy. We were. Mary and I both believe that life is a trial where you sink or swim by your own efforts, and we have fought our battle on the theory that no one is defeated in life until they quit trying and own up to defeat. And we have never done that yet. Life is still grand to us, and full of blessings that we are thankful for. Our biggest one is our family. We are proud of all of them, and the 13 in-laws we are blessed with. From 1948 to 1955, Mary and I have lived a very quiet life in Draper, and a very happy one. Mary has asthma, and has to be careful as she gets older, and I am getting old and deaf. And as all deaf people at my age do, I have quietly drawn out of active life, and spend a retired life at Draper with a few chickens, a big garden, and some flowers. Life still moves along with both of us strong and healthy, asthma accepted. Both of us enjoy the visits from the family, and Mary takes great comfort in church work, Relief Society, and genealogy. The people of Draper have been kind and courteous to us, and we have many friends among them. We have learned in all these years that it is vain and foolish to demand life to be our way, but that the road to happiness is yours, if you live your own life as it comes day by day, and bend yourself to enjoy what you have and what life gives you. Count your many blessings and be happy. My philosophy of life still stands: faith, hope, and charity. January 24th, 1953, was my birthday. I am 80 years old. We had a birthday dinner at Draper, a big cake, lots of presents, and good wishes from friends and family, sons and daughters and grandchildren and in-laws. A happy bunch they were, and I was happy to have them. They all said I looked 10 years younger than I was, and you want to believe that so badly, it really sounds like they meant it. As I look back as far as I can of the 80 years, it seems I have been blessed much more than I deserve, and that life has been very kind to me. The 13 children are all well, and the 13 in-laws are all well, and doing well. The 57 grandchildren are well, and the 18 great-grandchildren are well. Mary, my wife, is well, and after 57 years of married life, we are still together. We are still intensely proud of the family. We still get lots of happiness out of life. We are still full of hope for the future. And so, amen for the first 80 years.